She arrived at his door with a bruised jaw, a dead father's name written on a crumpled piece of paper, and $47 billion she couldn't touch. He opened the door with a shotgun in one hand and a sleeping 6-year-old draped over his shoulder. Neither of them said a word for a long moment. The wind tore across the flat October fields. The porch light flickered. Somewhere in the dark behind her, a black car idled with its headlights off like it was trying not to be seen. He looked at her. She looked at him. And the scarred farmer from Briar Ridge made the worst and best decision of his life. "Come inside," he said, "before someone sees you. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, stay with me until the very end, because I promise you, this one is going to wreck you in the best possible way." The alarm on Ethan Cole's phone went off at 4:47 every morning, though he was almost always awake before it. He didn't sleep much anymore. Hadn't in years. There was something about the particular silence of a farmhouse at 4 a.m., the way the old walls groaned, the way the wind moved through the gaps in the window frames, that kept him surfaced just below full consciousness. Not awake, not asleep. Just waiting. For what? He couldn't say. He'd stopped trying to figure that out a long time ago. He got up the way he always did. Quietly. Efficiently. He pulled on his work jeans from the chair beside the bed, the same chair where he'd laid his clothes every night for the past 4 years, ever since Lily started crawling into his room in the middle of the night, and he'd learned to dress in the dark without making noise. He didn't need to see the room. He knew every inch of it. The water stain shaped like a boot on the ceiling above the dresser. The loose floorboard 2 steps from the door that he kept meaning to fix. The faded photograph on the nightstand that he no longer turned face down, but also didn't look at directly anymore. He made coffee in the kitchen while it was still dark. Outside, the fields were black and flat under a sky crammed with stars. October in Briar Ridge came in hard and cold, not the pretty postcard kind of cold where leaves turned pretty colors and people drove out from the city to take pictures. The cold out here was working cold. It cracked the soil. It killed what wasn't strong enough to survive it. The first frost had already come 2 weeks ago, and the tomato plants along the east fence had gone with it, brown and collapsed against the wire, like something that had given up. Ethan stood at the kitchen window with his mug and looked at them. He needed to pull those plants before the ground hardened. He needed to check the irrigation line on the south field that had been draining wrong since September. He needed to call the bank, again, about the refinancing application that had been under review for 6 weeks now, which in his experience meant they were trying to figure out a polite way to say no. He added all 3 to the list in his head and drank his coffee. The scar that ran from just below his left eye down across his jaw and onto his neck pulled tight in the cold, the way it always did in October. He didn't reach up to touch it. He'd stopped doing that years ago, too. It was just part of his face now. Part of what he was. The accident had taken his wife, taken his confidence, taken a year of his life, and left him with a face that made strangers flinch and children sometimes cry. He'd made his peace with it, mostly. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and went out to start the morning. The farm was 63 acres. His grandfather had bought the land in 1961. His father had nearly lost it twice, and Ethan had nearly lost it once. The year after the accident, when the medical bills and the funeral costs and the months he couldn't work had combined into a number so large it didn't feel real. He'd survived that. Barely. Through a combination of stubbornness and a small business agricultural loan that had cost him more than he'd admit. He wasn't a romantic about the land. He didn't talk about the soil like it was sacred or whatever. It was a farm. It was work. It was the thing that got him out of bed in the morning when nothing else particularly wanted to. He fed the chickens first, then checked the water heater in the barn, then walked the fence line on the north pasture where one of his goats, a bad-tempered white female named Duchess, who had a talent for finding gaps in fences, had gotten out twice in the past month. The fence held. Duchess glared at him from inside the pen like she was personally offended by this. "Don't look at me like that," he told her. She kept looking at him like that. By the time the sun came up pale and yellow over the eastern fields, Ethan had been working for 2 hours. He went back inside when he heard Lily moving around upstairs. The particular pattern of her footsteps that meant she was up and had already decided something. Probably something that would require him to think before 7 a.m. She appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas with the small cats on them, her dark hair tangled from sleep, holding her stuffed rabbit named Gregory by one ear. "Daddy," she announced, "I think Duchess got out again." Duchess did not get out again. I just checked. I saw her by the tomatoes. Lily. I really did. He looked at her. She looked back at him with enormous brown eyes that were her mother's eyes. The thing about his daughter that could still catch him off guard sometimes. He took a breath. "I'll check after breakfast," he said. "Come down and eat." "Can I have the kind with the chocolate pieces?" "No." "Can I have the kind without the chocolate pieces, but also with the chocolate pieces?" "Sit down, Lily." She sat down, still holding Gregory, and watched him make oatmeal with the patient expression of someone who had not given up on the chocolate pieces. This was his life. It was small, and it was hard, and it smelled like coffee and barn and oatmeal, and he was not miserable inside of it. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself. He was not a man counting down some kind of sentence. He had his daughter, and his land, and his routine, and those things were real, and they were enough. He told himself that, and mostly he believed it. The black car appeared at the end of his driveway at 6:14 in the evening. Ethan noticed it from the barn, where he was patching a section of roof that had been letting water in since the storm 2 weeks ago. He had a flashlight clamped between his knees, his mouth full of roofing nails, and he noticed the headlights and thought, "Delivery, wrong address." It happened. The GPS coordinates for his farm were slightly off for some reason he'd never been able to figure out, and he regularly got lost Amazon drivers who looked confused and apologetic. But the car didn't move. It sat at the end of the driveway with its engine running and its headlights on, and it sat there for long enough that Ethan finished what he was doing, climbed down the ladder, spit out the roofing nails, and walked toward the house. Lily was inside with Mrs. Patterson from 3 miles down the road, a retired teacher who came over twice a week and had been functioning as something between a babysitter and a grandmother for the past 2 years. Ethan had asked her to stay late tonight so he could get the roof done before the next rain. He was glad now. He went inside through the back door and got the shotgun from the closet in the hallway. Not because he was afraid exactly. He'd lived out here long enough to know that people sitting at the end of your driveway at dark without announcing themselves were either lost, drunk, or something else, and he preferred to be prepared for the something else. Mrs. Patterson looked up from the kitchen table where she was helping Lily with addition problems. "Someone outside?" she asked. She was 64 years old and had grown up on a farm herself and did not seem particularly alarmed. "Probably a wrong address," Ethan said. "Probably," she agreed in a tone that meant she wasn't necessarily convinced. "Daddy has the gun," Lily announced, not looking up from her math worksheet. "Keep working on your numbers," Ethan said. He went out the front. The car. And he could see now it was a car that cost more than his farm equipment, some kind of black Mercedes sedan with tinted windows and rims that caught the porch light, had pulled partway up the driveway. As he stepped off the porch, the driver's side door opened and a man in a dark jacket got out. Not a threat. He kept his hands visible, and he took a step back like he was trying very hard to communicate that he was not a threat. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan stopped. "Who's asking?" "My name is James. I'm a driver." A pause. "I have someone in the car who would like to speak with you, if that's all right." "It's not all right," Ethan said. "Who is it?" The back door of the car opened before the driver could answer. She stepped out slowly. Later, when Ethan tried to reconstruct that first moment in his memory, he could never get it quite right. Part of the problem was the light. Just the porch light and the car's interior light, nothing clean. Part of the problem was that she was the last thing he expected. He'd been mentally preparing for a process server, or someone from the bank, or possibly one of the Garfield brothers from the next county over who'd had a dispute with him about a property line 2 years ago. What stepped out of that car was a woman in a dark coat that looked like it cost more than everything Ethan owned, with dark hair pulled back, and a face that might have been extraordinarily beautiful if it wasn't for the exhaustion sitting on it like a physical weight. She was younger than he expected, late 20s, maybe 30. She moved carefully, and it took him a moment to realize she was favoring her left side, holding herself slightly hunched. She looked at him across the 20 feet of gravel driveway. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. Then he noticed the bruising along her jaw, partially concealed by the collar of her coat. Fresh bruising, 2 or 3 days old. Mr. Cole, she said. Her voice was steadier than her eyes. My name is Victoria Langford. My father was Robert Langford. He said... She stopped, swallowed, tried again. He told me that if I found myself without anywhere to go, that I should come to you. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. The name Langford was familiar in the way that names of very wealthy people are familiar to people who have no connection to them. Through newspaper articles, through the agricultural news that Ethan read on his phone sometimes, through the background noise of the world. Robert Langford had been the largest private agricultural landowner in the state. He'd died 8 months ago. It had been in the news. Robert Langford told you to come to my farm, Ethan said flatly. It was not a question, exactly. Yes. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Then, he said you were the most honest man he ever knew, and that you'd understand. Ethan looked at the bruising on her jaw. He looked at the driver, who was staring at the hood of the car with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned not to see things. He looked back at Victoria Langford. He thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. He thought about his daughter inside the house, and the shotgun in his hand, and the bank loan that was still under review, and the 63 acres of cold October land that were already more than enough to manage. He thought about the fact that he was a scarred, antisocial farmer from a small town, and whatever this woman needed, he was almost certainly not equipped to provide it. Come inside, he said, before someone sees you. He made her tea because it was the first thing he could think of that seemed neutral and manageable. And he put the shotgun back in the closet, and he asked Mrs. Patterson very politely to take Lily upstairs and read with her for a while, which Mrs. Patterson did without asking questions, though the look she gave him on her way up the stairs contained approximately 17 questions. Victoria Langford sat at his kitchen table. Up close, in the kitchen light, she looked worse than she had in the driveway. The bruising on her jaw was worse than he'd thought. Not just jaw, it went up along her cheekbone. Her coat had a small tear in the left sleeve. Her hands, wrapped around the mug of tea he'd put in front of her, were not quite steady. He sat across from her. He did not ask what had happened to her face. He figured she would get to it or she wouldn't. She looked around the kitchen with the kind of careful attention that people use when they're trying to ground themselves in something real and immediate. The old cabinets, the dishes stacked on the open shelf, the child's drawing taped to the refrigerator, a yellow blob that was supposed to be Duchess, labeled Duchess in Lily's big block letters. Something in her face softened fractionally when she saw that. You have a daughter, she said. Lily. She's 6. I know. She caught herself. I mean, my father mentioned her. He mentioned you. Not a lot, but some. How did your father know me? She looked at her tea. He came out here. 8 years ago, maybe 9. He was looking at farmland in this county. He stopped here because he thought your property line might be contiguous with a parcel he was interested in. He said you invited him in for coffee, and you talked for 3 hours. Ethan remembered. He had been 23 or 24. His father had still been alive, and the farm had been in better shape. A tall man with silver hair and a handshake like a closing door had shown up, interested in the land adjacent to theirs. They'd sat at this same table, and his father had done most of the talking, but Ethan remembered the man. He remembered the directness of him, the way he asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He made an impression, Ethan said carefully. He made an impression on everyone he met. Her voice cracked slightly on that sentence, and she stopped talking for a second. He died in February. I know. I'm sorry. Thank you. She said it like the words had weight, not like a reflex. He left me the company, all of it. The land, the holdings, the executive board, all of it. And 2 weeks before he died, he took my hand and he told me... She stopped again, drew a breath. He told me that things were going to get hard. He knew they would. He knew what was waiting for me. And he said, if it ever gets to be too much, if you ever lose the ground under your feet, find Ethan Cole in Briar Ridge. He needs someone beside him as much as you do. Silence in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed. Upstairs, Ethan could hear Mrs. Patterson's voice reading something to Lily. Your father said I needed someone beside me, Ethan said slowly. Yes. He didn't know me. He remembered a young man whose wife had just gotten pregnant and whose eyes looked like he was already carrying something heavy. She paused. His words. Not mine. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What happened to your face? She touched her jaw. Briefly, reflexively, then stopped. There's a man named Damian Mercer. He's been on the executive board for 11 years. He worked for my father, but what he was actually doing was positioning himself to take control of the company if my father ever died. He has allies, lawyers, a lot of money that isn't his. He's been methodically destroying my credibility since February. A scandal that was manufactured, documents that were altered, stories given to journalists. She looked at him steadily. And 4 days ago, I made the mistake of confronting him at a board meeting without enough proof, and one of his people followed me to my car. But he had someone hit you. His man hit me, yes. And then he took my phone and my laptop bag, which had copies of the documentation I'd been building for 6 weeks. Ethan stared at her. Did you go to the police? And say what? That a man who employs 70 attorneys and has the ear of 3 federal officials had someone rough me up and steal my evidence? Damian would have that story buried before I finished the sentence. She picked up her tea and put it down again. I have no safe place to go. My apartment building, 2 of the staff there report to Damian's people. I don't know who, but I know it's happening. My friends have been pressured, warned off, or bought. The board thinks I'm unstable. The tabloids have spent 8 months making me look like a spoiled, incompetent child who got handed a company she can't run. For the first time, something angry moved across her face, and somehow it made her look more real than she had before. I am not incompetent. I built the organic sourcing division from a napkin sketch to a $12 million operation in 3 years while my father was still alive. I know this company. I know what it's worth and what it needs. But none of that matters if I can't survive long enough to prove it. So you came to a farm in Briar Ridge, Ethan said. So I came to the only person my father trusted completely. She looked at him directly. I know this is insane. I know I'm a stranger sitting in your kitchen at 7 in the evening asking for something I have no right to ask for, but I don't have anywhere else to go, Mr. Cole. I'm not making that up for sympathy. It's just the truth. The upstairs floorboard creaked. Lily was moving around. He could picture exactly what she was doing. She'd gotten bored with the reading, and she was probably trying to sneak to the top of the stairs to see what was happening in the kitchen. He looked at Victoria Langford. At the bruise on her jaw and the steadiness she was maintaining against what he could see was a genuine effort. You can stay in the spare room tonight, he said. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. He did not sleep. He lay in bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about what he was doing, and none of the thoughts were particularly comfortable. He knew, in a pragmatic way, what she needed. She needed protection, and the particular kind of protection you got from becoming difficult to attack. Someone had spent 8 months systematically isolating Victoria Langford, destroying every structure of support around her, and if Ethan had learned anything from watching his father navigate bad years on the farm, it was that isolation was a killing condition. For crops and for people. He also knew that he was a 32-year-old farmer with a scarred face, a struggling operation, and a 6-year-old daughter. He was not in any position to be anyone's protection. He barely had his own affairs in order. But he kept thinking about Robert Langford sitting at this kitchen table, young Ethan's father pouring coffee, the silver-haired man asking questions with actual interest, and the idea that this was something that connected somehow across years and deaths to arrive at his door. He thought about practical things. He thought about what protection looked like for a woman in her position. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, with the wind picking up outside and the loose window frame in the hallway rattling its familiar rattle, he arrived at an idea so absurd that he almost laughed. Almost. He found her in the kitchen at 6 the next morning. She was already up. She'd clearly barely slept either. And she'd made coffee, which surprised him. She was sitting at the table with both hands around the mug, staring at nothing, wearing the same clothes as yesterday. Gregory the rabbit was sitting in the center of the table between them because Lily had apparently snuck down before either adult was awake and introduced herself and her rabbit. And he could picture that interaction with a clarity that did something uncomfortable to his chest. Your daughter, Victoria said when she heard him, is the most self-possessed 6-year-old I have ever encountered. She gets it from her mother, Ethan said, and then stopped, because he hadn't said those words out loud in a long time, and they felt strange in the kitchen air. Victoria looked at him. She didn't say she was sorry, she just looked, which was somehow better. He poured himself coffee. He sat across from her. He thought about how to say what he was going to say. "I've been thinking," he started. "I heard you walking around at 2 a.m., she said. "The floors are thin." "I know, I keep meaning to. Anyway," he put his mug down. "The problem is that this Mercer is trying to isolate you, make you look erratic and unsupported, make it easy to push you out." "Yes. The fastest way to change that is to make you harder to isolate, to put you in a structure that's publicly visible and difficult to attack without making Mercer look like what he is." She was watching him carefully. "What are you suggesting?" "A marriage agreement," he said. "Between us. Legal. Documented. It would give you a legitimate address outside his reach, give you time and cover to rebuild your evidence, and make it a lot harder for him to paint you as unstable and alone. The story becomes something else. You didn't collapse. You found a different kind of life, at least publicly. And anyone who comes after you comes after us both, which complicates things for people who prefer easy targets." The silence that followed was long enough that he heard a rooster crowing somewhere outside, which was embarrassing because he didn't own a rooster, so that must have been from 2 fields over. "You're proposing to me," Victoria said, very carefully, "to protect me from a hostile corporate takeover. I'm proposing a legal arrangement that protects both of us, yes. You get cover and time. I get—" He stopped. "Honestly, I get the satisfaction of not watching someone get beaten by a bully, which is something I have a problem with on principle." She stared at him. "You don't know me." "You don't know me either. I could be exactly what Damien says I am. Incompetent, unstable, a liability. Are you?" "No." "Then we're fine." Another silence. He was very aware of how insane this sounded when said out loud. "There would need to be conditions," she said slowly. "Rules, boundaries. This would be a business arrangement." "Agreed. I would maintain control of my own decisions regarding the company. Obviously, I don't know anything about running a billion-dollar corporation. And your daughter? Lily needs to be protected from any instability this creates. She doesn't— This can't affect her negatively." Something tightened in Ethan's chest. The fact that she'd said that first before anything about herself was not a small thing. "Agreed." Victoria looked at him for a long, long moment. He made himself look back without looking away, which was harder than it sounded. He'd gotten used to people not meeting his eyes directly, not with the scarring, and having someone hold his gaze with that kind of assessment was uncomfortable and also, weirdly, not unwelcome. "Why would you do this?" she asked. Not challenging, genuinely wanting to understand. He thought about it honestly before he answered. "Because your father told you to come here. And he was right that I understand what it is to need something to hold on to when everything else is going. And because my daughter is 6 years old and already knows more about loss than any 6-year-old should, and she deserves to grow up knowing that people in this world will still do the hard thing when it matters." Victoria looked away first. She looked at the window, at the gray October morning outside. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." "This is insane," she added. "Completely," he agreed. The courthouse wedding happened on a Thursday morning. 11 days after Victoria Langford showed up on his porch, Ethan Cole put on the one good shirt he owned, blue, his mother had given it to him 3 Christmases before she died, and drove them both to the county seat in his truck, which was a 2008 Ford that rattled over 40 miles an hour and had a crack in the passenger window that he'd fixed with electrical tape. Victoria was wearing a dark dress that she'd had delivered from somewhere. She looked remarkable and deeply out of place in the passenger seat of his truck, and she kept her eyes on the road ahead and her hands folded in her lap the entire drive. They didn't talk much. Lily had stayed home with Mrs. Patterson, who had been told that Ethan was going to handle some paperwork. Mrs. Patterson had looked at him with a particular expression that said she was aware this was not the whole truth, but respected his right to keep parts of his life private. The ceremony took 4 minutes. The clerk's name was Donna, and she had clearly performed enough of these to have calibrated her enthusiasm to the exact level of warmth needed without overplaying it. She pronounced them married, they both signed the certificate, and Ethan shook the hands of the 2 witnesses who were complete strangers and had been recruited from the courthouse hallway. Outside in the parking lot, standing by his truck with the cold October sun hitting the asphalt, they both stood very still for a moment. "Well?" Victoria said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "That was not how I imagined getting married." Me either, he said, and then caught himself, because that implied he'd imagined it, which was an oversharing of something he hadn't intended to share. The paperwork should be filed by end of day. Your legal status changes immediately. Right. She looked at the truck. Should we? Get in. It's cold. They drove back to the farm mostly in silence, and the electrical tape on the window made a small flapping sound the whole way. And Ethan thought, this is the most improbable thing I have ever done. And somewhere alongside that thought, she looked at my face in that courthouse and she didn't flinch once. It was a small thing. It should not have mattered. It mattered. The town found out by Friday evening. Briar Ridge was the kind of place where news moved through the air before it made it to anyone's phone. Someone at the courthouse knew someone who worked at the diner who knew the woman who cut hair at the single barbershop that doubled as a social exchange for town information. By the time Ethan drove into town Saturday morning to pick up hardware supplies, 3 different people had given him the particular look that meant they knew something and were deciding whether to say it. Jerry at the hardware store just said it. So you got married? Yep, Ethan said. To Victoria Langford? Yep. The billionaire. Is there another Victoria Langford I should know about? Jerry stared at him. Jerry was 61 years old and had known Ethan since he was born and had a deeply personal investment in the affairs of everyone he'd watched grow up, which he would describe as friendly concern and which most people would describe as nosiness. Ethan, what are you doing? Buying half-inch roofing screws. You know what I mean. Jerry, Ethan put his hands on the counter. I appreciate that you're asking because you care. I genuinely do. Can I have the screws? He got the screws. He also got 3 texts from people whose numbers he barely recognized, 2 voicemails from reporters who had somehow gotten his number already, and 1 long, profane message from his cousin Derek in Columbus, who had seen something online and was losing his mind about it. By Sunday, there were photographs on 2 celebrity news websites. Someone had gotten a picture of them leaving the courthouse, probably from a phone, grabbed quickly. Not a great photo, but recognizable. The headline on the bigger site read, Billionaire CEO, Victoria. Langford. Secretly weds reclusive farmer in rural courthouse ceremony. Source says family disapproves. There was no family on her side to disapprove of. Her father was dead, and she had no siblings. Ethan's family was his daughter and a cousin in Columbus who would get over it. But the story was out. He showed her the article that evening. They were in the kitchen after Lily was in bed, and Victoria read the headline and the article with an expression that was completely still and unreadable. They called you reclusive, she noted. I am reclusive. They called the farm dusty. Something in her voice was not quite humor, but adjacent to it. It's not that dusty. It's a little dusty, Ethan said honestly. She put the phone face down on the table. Damien will see this. He'll know where I am. I know. He'll try to use it. I know. Ethan looked at her. Let him try. She looked back at him, and for a moment in the kitchen light with the cold outside and the house quiet around them, something passed between them that was neither of them ready to name. An acknowledgement of something, a recognition. Then she picked up her tea and said, I should get to my laptop. I have work to do. I'll lock up, he said. And that was all. But something in the room had shifted, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. Pochette. Victoria had been on his farm for 11 days, and Ethan was already not entirely sure what the farm had looked like before she arrived. Not because she'd changed it dramatically. She hadn't. She was careful about that. Careful not to overstep. Careful to ask before touching or moving anything. But she was present in a way that the farm hadn't had presence in a long time. She was up at 6:30 every morning without an alarm. She made coffee. She watched him work without hovering. She had a way of sitting on the porch with her laptop that meant she was available without being in the way. And Ethan, who had spent 4 years being quietly irritated by anyone who was in the way, noticed the difference. She made mistakes. The first time she helped him move equipment to the storage barn, she stacked the feed sacks wrong, and he had to restack them, and he told her so directly, which he half expected to offend her, and instead she said, "Show me how," and he showed her, and she did it right the next time without needing to be told again. He respected that more than he expected to. Lily had decided, with the complete confidence of a 6-year-old who had made up her mind, that Victoria was wonderful. This was both useful and terrifying. Useful because it made the household feel less like a negotiation and more like something organic. Terrifying because Ethan watched his daughter attach herself to this woman, following her around the garden, insisting on sitting next to her at dinner, presenting her with drawings that Victoria accepted with a seriousness that Lily took very seriously. And he knew, with the certainty of someone who'd survived loss, that this was the kind of thing that could hurt. He didn't say that. He watched, and he worried quietly, and he told himself that they were adults managing a temporary arrangement. And in the meantime, his daughter was happy, and he couldn't in good conscience ask her to be less happy on the basis of his own fear. One evening, it was the end of October by now, cold and clear, he came into the kitchen to find Victoria and Lily sitting together at the table, Lily frowning over a drawing she was making while Victoria watched and made occasional suggestions. "The tail should be longer," Victoria said. "Horses have long tails?" "Really long. Like this." She leaned over and sketched a line on the margin of Lily's paper, and Lily looked at it and looked at her horse drawing and looked back with the expression of someone who had received genuinely useful information. "How do you know about horses?" Lily demanded. "I grew up with them. My father had 4. "What were their names?" "Thunder, Sugar, Biscuit, and Professor Hooves." Lily's face broke open into complete delight. "Professor Hooves!" "He was very serious about his work," Victoria said gravely. Lily dissolved into giggles. Ethan stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them, and felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in years and didn't know what to do with it, and went back outside to check on the fence he'd already checked twice that day. By the time October slid into November, they had found something like a rhythm. It wasn't comfortable exactly. There were moments of awkwardness and misunderstanding and the kind of friction that happens when two people who've both been alone for a long time learn to share space. Victoria was used to a level of control over her environment that the farm didn't accommodate. Ethan was used to silence and found the constant background noise of someone else's phone calls and keyboard and existence occasionally overwhelming in a way he didn't entirely know how to express. They argued twice about the kitchen, once about whether the good knives should be washed by hand, once about something so small he couldn't even remember what it was by the following morning, though he remembered that they'd both stood at opposite ends of the kitchen talking carefully over each other until Lily wandered in and asked what was for dinner, and they'd both stopped and made dinner. But the rhythm was there, and Ethan was finding, in the quiet honesty of his own mind, that he didn't hate it. He didn't hate having someone to drink coffee with in the dark mornings before Lily came downstairs. He didn't hate the way Victoria had started checking on the animals with him in the evenings without being asked. He didn't hate that the house was warmer somehow, not in temperature, but in some quality he couldn't name. He'd been cold for a long time in a way that had nothing to do with weather, and he hadn't known it until something started to change. He thought about that in the dark. He thought about his daughter's mother, and the photograph on the nightstand, and the gap between grief and whatever this was, and he did not come to any conclusions because some things don't resolve cleanly. He got up in the morning, he made coffee, he went to work. The storm was coming. He could feel it in the air. He didn't know yet what the storm would cost. The first week of November came in gray and mean, the kind of weather that didn't announce itself dramatically, but simply settled over the county like a lid being placed over something. The fields went brown. The sky stayed the color of old concrete. Ethan woke up each morning and checked the forecast on his phone before he checked anything else, not because there was much he could do about it, but because knowing what was coming had always felt marginally better than being surprised by it. Victoria had been on the farm for 3 weeks. Ethan kept finding evidence of her in rooms where she hadn't been. A coffee mug rinsed and placed upside down on the drying rack, which he never did. A small pile of rocks arranged on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, which he suspected came from Lily, but the arrangement was too geometric for a 6-year-old. The barn latch pulled fully closed every evening, which Ethan had a habit of leaving slightly loose because it was faster to open that way. She'd fixed that without saying anything. He'd noticed without saying anything either. This was how they communicated a significant portion of the time, through small adjustments and silences, and it was, he was beginning to realize, not actually a bad way to communicate. Lily had started calling her Miss Vicky. It had started on a Tuesday morning when Lily, face full of oatmeal, had looked up and said it like she'd been saying it for years, completely naturally, and Victoria had paused with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth and done something with her expression that Ethan couldn't read. It was there and gone in less than a second, and then said, "Good morning, Lily," with complete evenness, like nothing had shifted. But something had shifted. Ethan saw it. He didn't say anything about it. What he said instead was, "Finish your oatmeal." He had also started noticing things about Victoria that were inconvenient to notice. The specific way she read documents on her laptop, hunched forward slightly, one hand pressing the side of her jaw, moving her lips very slightly over the difficult parts. The way she was with the animals, not a farm person, not comfortable with them the way Ethan was, but she didn't perform discomfort either, didn't make a show of being a city woman out of her depth. When Duchess the goat got into the vegetable garden and needed to be removed, Victoria just grabbed the collar and pulled, getting her boots muddy in the process, and said only, "She's stronger than she looks," which was true of Duchess and possibly other things. He noticed these things. He filed them away. He tried not to assign too much weight to them, which was difficult because he was not, it turned out, as emotionally closed off as he'd been telling himself he was for 4 years. This discovery was not particularly welcome. The tabloid coverage had not let up. If anything, it had intensified in the way that things on the internet intensify when the original story generates traffic. People wrote follow-up pieces, opinion columns, the particular kind of breathless social media commentary that fed on itself. Most of it was ridiculous. Some of it was cruel. One piece specifically described Ethan as disfigured, and Victoria as clearly in some kind of breakdown. And Victoria had read that one on her phone at the kitchen table, and her face had gone very still, and then she'd put the phone face down and said, "I need to go check on the chickens," and gone outside. He'd given her 20 minutes. Then he'd gone out and found her sitting on the upturned feed bucket by the chicken run, not doing anything, just sitting. "You don't have to check on the chickens," he said. "The chickens are fine. They're chickens. They're always fine." "I know," she said. "You don't have to pretend the article didn't bother you." She looked up at him. The sky was gray behind her. "I've been in the news my entire adult life. I know how this works. I know it's just noise." "Knowing and not feeling aren't the same thing," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "They called you disfigured." "Yeah. That bothered me more than what they said about me." She said it like she was reporting a fact without performance. "That bothered me a lot, actually." Ethan looked at her for a moment. He thought about saying something. He thought about several things. He said, "Come inside. Lily's going to ask where you are." Victoria stood up from the feed bucket and followed him in, and neither of them talked about it anymore. But the conversation sat in the space between them for the rest of the day, and neither of them pushed it away entirely. What Ethan didn't tell Victoria, what he hadn't told anyone, because there was no one he'd have told, was that the article had gotten to him in a specific way that he was not proud of. Not the word disfigured, though that sat on him like a bruise. What had gotten to him was the implication behind it. The narrative the articles were collectively building, that Victoria had married below herself, that she'd made a desperate decision and ended up with a damaged man on a failing farm, that the story of their marriage was one of her loss and his gain. He knew the arrangement, he'd proposed it himself. He knew exactly what it was and wasn't. But somewhere in the past 3 weeks, living in the same house as this woman, watching her with his daughter, learning the particular shape of her presence, somewhere in there, the arrangement had started to feel like something else to him, something that was more than practical. And reading those articles and seeing his life reflected back through that lens, damaged man, failing farm, desperate woman, had produced a cold, specific kind of shame that he hadn't felt in years. He hadn't been ashamed of his face in years. The fact that he felt it now, in relation to her, was information he didn't want to have. He shoved it down where he put things he wasn't ready to look at, and he went back to work, because work was the one thing that had never failed to occupy enough of his mind to crowd out everything else. The fence on the south pasture needed 3 new posts. He put them in by hand, in the cold, and focused on nothing but the placement of each post. And by the time he finished, his shoulders ached, and his hands were numb, and the space in his mind was quiet and clean. He was good at that, at least. Damian Mercer's people made their first move on a Monday. Ethan didn't know it was Mercer at first. He found out from his bank, a call from the branch manager, a man named Harris who Ethan had dealt with for 6 years and who had always been straight with him, who called to tell him, with audible discomfort, that their refinancing application had been flagged. A third party had submitted what appeared to be documentation suggesting irregularities in the farm's financial history. The application was now under a secondary review that could take several additional weeks. What kind of irregularities? Ethan asked. I'm not able to share the specifics of the documentation, but I can tell you. Harris lowered his voice. I can tell you, off the record, that this is not coming from inside the bank. Someone outside submitted this. Someone with access to financial records I wouldn't expect a third party to have. Someone, Ethan said flatly. I'm not going to say a name, but the timing is what it is. Ethan thanked him and hung up and sat in the truck for a long moment before going inside. The refinancing had been his safety net. The loan he'd taken after the accident, the one that had saved the farm and cost him badly in interest, was structured in a way that became unsustainable in another 18 months without the refinancing. Without it, the timeline on the farm's survival compressed sharply. He'd kept this information to himself because it was his problem, and because telling someone else about it would have made it feel more real, and he hadn't been ready for that. But now someone had reached into that problem and pushed on it deliberately, and that changed things. He went inside. Victoria was at the kitchen table with her laptop, 3 phones, and a legal pad covered in handwriting. She had a call going on one of the phones, muted, waiting. She looked up when he came in, saw something in his face. What happened? He told her. He laid it out plainly. The loan, the refinancing, the call from Harris, the implication. He watched her face while he talked, and she listened the way she always listened. Completely, without interrupting, without preparing her response until he'd finished. When he was done, she was quiet for 4 seconds. He counted. That's him, she said. That's Damien's method. He doesn't come at you directly. He finds the thing you need, and he quietly removes it. He did the same thing to me with the bank relationship on the organic sourcing division. He doesn't want to look like the bad actor. He just wants you isolated and desperate. Well, Ethan said, he's got the isolated part covered. Not entirely. She pulled the legal pad toward her. This is fixable. Not fast, but fixable. I have contacts, financial contacts my father built over 40 years, who can apply pressure to a secondary review, not illegally, just visibly. People who can make it known that they're watching what happens to this application. Victoria. No, listen. I'm not asking you to fix it, he said. Not harshly, but directly. She looked at him. I know you're not asking. I'm offering. I know you are. He sat down across from her. And I appreciate it. But I need to know what I'm walking into. What is Mercer actually trying to do? Is the farm an obstacle, or is it just leverage? She thought about it seriously. Leverage, most likely. If he can make you desperate enough to want out of this marriage, I lose the stability the marriage creates. And if he can make the farm fail publicly, he uses that to feed the narrative that you were only in this for my money and the arrangement fell apart. Either way, he gets his story. What's his story? That I'm not fit to run the company, that my judgment is compromised, that marrying a struggling farmer, she said it carefully, watching him, was evidence of an emotional breakdown, not a real choice. He takes that to the board removes me, and he steps in as interim CEO while a formal review happens. He's been building toward that for 8 months. And how long does he have before the board meeting where he makes that move? 6 weeks? A pause. Maybe 7. Okay, Ethan said. Okay, what? Okay, 6 weeks. We have 6 weeks to put together enough that the board can't ignore what he is. He looked at her. What do you need? She stared at him for a moment like she was recalibrating something. You're not worried about the farm? The farm is my problem. I'll handle it. What do you need to take Mercer down? She opened her mouth, closed it, then picked up the legal pad. I need to access 3 sets of internal documents that Damien's had locked behind his personal network credentials. I have copies of some of them, but they're incomplete. His people got the rest when they took my bag. I need someone inside the company who's scared enough of what he's doing to go on record, and I need... She stopped. What? I need to be visible, publicly stable. If I'm hiding on a farm, Damien's narrative wins by default. I need to show up. Board events, public appearances, the annual agricultural summit in December. I need to go, and I need to not look like someone who's falling apart. You don't look like someone who's falling apart, Ethan said. No, but I need to look like someone whose life is together. And right now, part of that is... She set down the legal pad. Part of that means you'd need to come with me to some of these things, which I know is not what you signed up for, and I understand if you don't want to. I'll come, he said. She stopped talking. I said I'd come, he repeated. Tell me which ones matter most. She looked at him for a long moment. Ethan, this would put you in rooms full of people who are going to look at you and have opinions about you, and some of those opinions are going to be unpleasant. I know what people look like when they're having unpleasant opinions about me, he said. I've been seeing that face since I was 27. I can manage it. Victoria didn't say anything else. She looked down at her legal pad. He thought he saw something in her face before she looked away. Not pity, not sympathy exactly, something closer to recognition. And then she clicked her pen and started writing. He got up to start dinner. Lily would be in from playing in another 20 minutes, and she'd want to tell them about her day in the particular exhaustive detail that 6-year-olds provide, and he needed to have something on the stove by then or she'd start negotiating for cereal. He put a pot on. He thought about the 6 weeks and the board meeting and Damian Mercer, a man he'd never met, reaching across whatever distance separated them to interfere with his loan and his farm and his life. He had always, his whole life, been very bad at being interfered with. The market day was Victoria's idea. Not directly. She didn't suggest it as a strategy. She suggested it practically because it was Saturday and the Briar Ridge Farmers Market ran until noon, and Ethan had a crate of late-season root vegetables that were going to start going soft if he didn't move them. And Victoria said very simply, I can run the stand if you have other things to do. You've never run a market stand, Ethan said. It can't be more complicated than a shareholder meeting, she said. You'd be surprised, he said, but he let her come. He set up the stand and started to walk her through pricing, and she interrupted him after 45 seconds because she'd already looked it up on her phone and had a better understanding of the market rate for butternut squash than he did, which was annoying and correct. He left her with the cash box and the vegetables and went to pick up supplies from the hardware co-op. He was back in 40 minutes. There was a small cluster of people at his stand, not unusual on a Saturday morning, but the cluster was larger than normal. And as he got closer, he could hear Victoria talking, not performing, just talking, explaining the difference between how his squash was grown versus the hybrid stuff from the large commercial operation 2 booths over. And she was doing it in a way that was knowledgeable and genuine and not remotely superior. And people were listening the way they listened when they felt like they were getting real information. Lily was sitting on the cooler beside the stand, helping with the change, taking this responsibility extremely seriously. Ethan stood at the edge of the small crowd and watched the 3 people buying vegetables, and the way Victoria laughed at something an older woman said. A real laugh, not a polished public figure laugh, genuinely caught off guard by whatever the joke was. And he felt something move in his chest like something that had been stuck was coming loose. It was Margie Hollis who first said something. Margie was 68 and had known Ethan since he was a child and had opinions about everything and shared them without being asked, which was her particular quality, and she waited until the small cluster dispersed and then came up to the stand and looked at Victoria with the direct assessment of someone who did not have time for anything less than the truth. You're not what I expected, Margie said. Victoria met her eyes without flinching. What did you expect? Something shinier. I get that a lot lately, Victoria said. Margie looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Ethan, who had come to stand at the edge of the stand. She's direct, Margie told him, like he was receiving information. I like direct. I know you do, Margie, he said. Your daughter's been counting change wrong, Margie added helpfully, and then left. Lily looked up from the coins in her hand with an expression of deep offense. Victoria looked at the coins. Then she leaned down and quietly showed Lily what she'd done wrong, and Lily counted again, got it right, and said, I knew that. Of course you did, Victoria said seriously. I just miscounted. Totally different thing. Exactly. Ethan started breaking down the remaining vegetables and stacking the empty crates, and he was smiling without meaning to, and he stopped when he caught himself and then started again because he couldn't help it, and that was its own kind of problem. The bigger problem arrived 10 days later in the form of a man Ethan didn't recognize who showed up at the farm on a Wednesday afternoon, just as the first real snow of the season was threatening from the north. He was dressed like a city person who'd bought farm-adjacent clothing specifically for this visit. New boots, coat that still had its creases. He introduced himself as Preston, which was a last name used as a first name, which Ethan had always found pretentious. He said he was a journalist working on a profile. "I didn't agree to a profile," Ethan said. "I'm hoping you might be willing to talk." "No," Ethan said. "Mr. Cole, no." He stepped off the porch. "You came onto private property without calling first. You're going to get back in your car, and you're going to leave." The man, Preston, stood his ground for a moment in the way that people stand their ground when they're trying to decide if the risk is worth it. He looked at Ethan's face, at the scar, and made a calculation that Ethan recognized and that used to bother him more than it did now. "Mercer's people told me you'd be uncooperative," Preston said. "Mercer's people," Ethan said. "Good. Now I know who sent you." He held the gate open pointedly. "Drive safe. The county road floods at the second intersection when it snows." Preston left. Ethan watched the car go and then went back inside and told Victoria, who closed her laptop and asked 3 specific questions about how the man had known to come to the farm, what he'd been driving, and whether the camera on his phone had been aimed at the house before Ethan got to the gate. Why the camera? Because a photograph of the farm positioned correctly, rundown fences, peeling paint on the barn, is worth more to Damien's story than anything I could say in a deposition. She pulled her legal pad toward her. "He's accelerating. 6 weeks might have been optimistic." "How long do we actually have?" She was quiet. 4 weeks, maybe. If he pushes the emergency board review, I think he's been preparing." "What do you need that you don't have?" "I need Marcus Webb." She said the name like she'd been avoiding saying it for a while. "He was my father's personal accountant for 18 years. He knows where every dollar in that company moved. If Damien has been diverting funds, and I believe he has been, Marcus would know. But Marcus won't talk to me. He's terrified." "Where is he?" "I don't know. He stopped returning my calls in April. I think Damien's people found a way to pressure him." "People don't disappear completely," Ethan said. "Not from people who knew them." She looked at him. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking your father kept that accountant for 18 years because your father was the kind of man who made people feel like their loyalty meant something. And I'm thinking that the person Marcus Webb was most loyal to is dead. But maybe he'd respond to the person that man trusted enough to send here." Victoria's expression shifted. "You think I should go see him?" "I think we both should." "You'd come with me." "You keep being surprised by that," Ethan said. She looked at him for a second, then looked away and said, "I shouldn't be, I guess." It wasn't the words. It was how she said them, quietly, like something she was noting for herself. And Ethan knew better than to push it, so he didn't. But he stood in the kitchen for a long moment after she went back to her laptop before he moved. That night, he walked the fence line before dark the way he always did, and the cold air had the iron smell of incoming snow, and the fields were going brown and still. He stopped at the north end and stood there looking at the sky, which was doing something dramatic with low clouds and the last of the light. He thought about 4 years. The years after the accident, after Sarah. The years of learning to be a father in the specific absence of everything else he'd thought his life would be. He had built something during those years, built it deliberately and carefully out of routine and necessity and the particular stubbornness that was maybe his best quality, or maybe just his way of being afraid of falling apart. He'd built a small life, and it was not glamorous and it was not whole, but it was his and it held. And now there was a woman in his house who laughed in the kitchen with his daughter and worried about Marcus Webb, and had looked at his face in the courthouse without flinching, and the small life he'd built was doing something he hadn't expected it to do. It was making room. He didn't know what to do with that. He was not a man who moved quickly toward things, who opened easily, who trusted the way people trusted when they hadn't been taught the cost of it. He had loved one person and lost her and spent 4 years building walls that he'd told himself were not walls at all, just the natural architecture of a quiet life. He turned and walked back toward the house. The lights were on in the kitchen. Through the window, he could see the shape of Victoria at the table, and beyond her, at the counter, the small moving shape that was Lily, still in her pajamas, performing some kind of complex and highly personal dance that she was apparently doing for no audience but herself. He watched them for a moment, standing in the cold. Then he went inside because it was cold and because that was where they were, and those were the 2 things that mattered. "You're letting cold air in," Victoria said without looking up. "I know," he said, and closed the door behind him. Lily stopped dancing. "Daddy, I invented a new dance." "I could see that. Do you want to see it again?" "After dinner." "It involves spinning." "After dinner, Lily." She spun once anyway, preemptively, and knocked Gregory the stuffed rabbit off the counter and bent to pick him up with perfect unself-consciousness. And that was the three of them in the kitchen in November with snow coming and 4 weeks on the clock and everything uncertain. For a moment, in the warm kitchen with the smell of whatever Victoria had started heating on the stove and his daughter's voice asking a question he didn't quite catch. For that specific moment, Ethan Cole felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happy, exactly. That was too simple a word for it. More like present. Fully, completely present in his own life. Not watching it from the outside, not managing the distance from it. In it. Right in the middle of it, with all the mess and the uncertainty and the something shifting that he didn't have a name for yet. It lasted maybe 10 seconds before Lily knocked something else off the counter, and Victoria made a sound that was either dismay or laughter, and he went to help clean it up. But 10 seconds was more than he'd had in a long time. He was not ready to examine what that meant. But he was honest enough with himself, standing at the kitchen counter at nightfall with snow beginning to tap against the window, and his daughter showing Victoria the exact technique required for picking up a dropped stuffed rabbit without bending your knees, to admit that the question was no longer whether something was changing. The question now was what he was going to do when it finished changing. He did not have an answer yet. He suspected the answer was not going to come from anywhere quiet. The snow started at 11 that night and came in hard. By morning, the fields were white. The snow that started on that November night didn't leave for 5 days. It wasn't a blizzard, nothing dramatic enough to make the news, just a steady, insistent accumulation that came down in shifts, resting and then resuming until the farm was buried under 8 inches of white silence that changed the shape of everything. The fields disappeared. The fence lines became suggestions. The barn roof held 2 inches of packed snow along its ridgeline that Ethan had to knock down with a long pole each morning to keep the load from becoming a problem. He didn't mind the snow. He never had. There was something about the way it compressed the world into what was close and necessary that suited him. You couldn't worry about the bank loan, or the board meeting, or Damian Mercer when the driveway needed clearing and the animals needed tending, and the pipes under the kitchen needed to be left running overnight to keep them from freezing. The farm became purely physical for a few days, and physical was something Ethan could always manage. Victoria did not know how to manage snow. This was not a criticism. It was just a fact about someone who had grown up in the city, moved to a penthouse at 22, and had spent the past decade in buildings where other people handled weather as a professional service. The first morning she came outside to help with the driveway, she was wearing the wrong gloves, thin leather, completely useless. And Ethan handed her his spare pair without comment, and she put them on and picked up the second shovel without being asked, which was the right response. She was slow. She tired faster than he did. She also did not stop, and she did not complain. And by the third morning, she had learned the correct technique without Ethan having to explain it, apparently from watching how he held the shovel. Lily decided that snow was the greatest development in the history of the farm, and spent every non-school hour outdoors in a level of gear that made her look like a small, well-insulated astronaut. Victoria had gone online and ordered her a proper snowsuit, the kind with the sealed seams that actually kept water out. And when it arrived and Lily tried it on and looked at herself in the hallway mirror, her reaction was so incandescent that even Ethan had to leave the room for a moment to compose himself. He was aware that he kept needing to do that. Leave the room, compose himself. He was spending considerable energy pretending to be less moved by things than he actually was, and this was tiring in a new way that he hadn't anticipated and didn't entirely know how to address. On the 4th snow day, they found Marcus Webb. It had taken Victoria's contact, a woman named Priya who had worked with Robert Langford for a decade and trusted his daughter entirely. 3 days of careful searching to locate the accountant. He was in a rental house in a small town called Elton, 2 hours northeast of Briar Ridge, under what appeared to be his wife's maiden name. He hadn't used his own credit cards in 6 months. "He's hiding," Victoria said, looking at the address on her phone. Her voice was flat in the specific way it got when she was controlling something. "From Mercer," Ethan said. "From whatever Mercer threatened him with." She put the phone face down on the table. He has a daughter in college, a son in middle school. If Mercer's people found a way to threaten the kids' futures, tuition, scholarships, his wife's job, Marcus would fold. He's not a brave man. He never was. He was a good accountant and a loyal one, and loyalty only holds so far when children are involved. So we go there and ask him to be brave, Ethan said. Essentially, yes. That's a hard ask. I know. What do you have to offer him? She was quiet for a moment. Protection. Legal protection, if he'll testify. My father had a relationship with a federal prosecutor, not corrupt, just old professional respect. And I think if Marcus gives us what we need, there's a path to immunity or at minimum cover. But I have to get him talking first. When do we go? She looked at him. She did that thing sometimes, looked at him a beat longer than strictly necessary, like she was checking something. The snow should clear by Friday. Saturday morning? Saturday morning, he said. Mrs. Patterson agreed to take Lily for the day without asking questions, which was one of her consistent and genuinely valuable qualities. Saturday broke cold and clear, the sky that hard winter blue that comes after snow, and they drove northeast in Ethan's truck with the heat running and the cracked window taped against the cold. They barely talked for the first hour. Victoria had her laptop open across her knees, reviewing documents, and Ethan drove and listened to the radio turned low and watched the fields go by. He was comfortable with this. He'd noticed that she was too, which was part of what had changed in the past month without either of them announcing it. The silences between them had graduated from the careful kind to the ordinary kind, the kind that don't require management. He was thinking about this, specifically about how quickly it had happened, how a month ago he'd been alone in this truck, and now the truck felt different with her in it. When she said, without looking up from the laptop, "Tell me about your wife." The truck didn't swerve. His hands didn't tighten on the wheel, but something in his chest did a specific thing that he felt in his fingertips. "Why?" he said. "Because I've been in your house for a month, and I see her everywhere in Lily, and you never talk about her, and I think—" She paused. "I think you should be able to someone. I don't know, forget it." "Her name was Sarah," he said. Victoria closed the laptop. She was funny. Not performance funny. She didn't try to be funny. She just said whatever she actually thought, and it was almost always funnier than what anyone was trying to say. She was a third-grade teacher. She was terrible at directions and refused to use the GPS because she said it made her feel managed. He stopped. "She died in the same accident that did this." He touched the scar briefly, once. "We'd been married 2 years. Lily was 2.5. "Ethan?" Victoria said quietly. She would have been an unbelievable mother. She was already, even in 2.5 years, she was already... "Lily has her eyes. I don't know if you noticed. Lily has her whole face, honestly." "I noticed," Victoria said. He didn't say anything else for a minute. The road went straight through flat white fields, and the sky was very blue. "I'm not," he started. "I'm not still in it the way I was. The grief. I want to be honest about that because sometimes people assume. It's been 4 years and it's different now. But she was a good person, and she would have been good for Lily in ways I'm not. And sometimes that's the part that still sits." "The ways you can't replace," Victoria said. "Yeah." Another silence, but a different kind. "My father was the last person I had," Victoria said eventually. "Not matching grief for grief, just offering something back, something real. My mother left when I was 9. I don't mean she died. I mean she chose to leave. She wanted a different life, and she took it. My father never said anything bad about her. He just raised me and ran a company, and those were the 2 things he did. He was not warm, exactly. He was not a hugs and feelings kind of person. But he was there. Every single day he was there. And that turned out to be what I needed, and I didn't know how much until he wasn't." Ethan nodded. He didn't offer the standard phrases. He'd always hated the standard phrases. "What he said about you," Victoria continued, "the conversation he remembered from your farm, he said you were the kind of man who would still be there, that you'd be exactly where you said you'd be." She was looking out the passenger window now. "I think he was right. I haven't done anything special," Ethan said. "You've done everything I've needed," she said. "That's not nothing." He drove. The radio played something low and old. Outside, the winter fields went past. He didn't say what he was thinking. He had a policy about that. Thinking something and not yet knowing what it was, not saying it until he understood it better. It had gotten him into trouble before, the silence, but it had also saved him from saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment, and right now he genuinely wasn't sure which risk was greater. So he drove, and the fields went past, and the truck rattled over 40 miles an hour the way it always did, and Victoria's shoulder was 4 inches from his arm, and neither of them moved away from that proximity. Marcus Webb answered the door, looking like a man who'd lost 15 pounds and found something worse in the process. He was 61, gray-haired, and had the particular look of someone who had been checking windows as a habit. He saw Victoria, and something passed across his face. Not surprise exactly. More like a man who had been expecting a reckoning and was relieved and terrified in equal measure to see it arrive. "Victoria," he said. "Marcus." Her voice was even. "Can we come in?" He stepped back. His wife was not home. At her sister's for the weekend, he said unnecessarily, like he needed to explain why they could talk. The house was small and meticulously clean, in the way of someone who had needed to control something. They sat in the living room. Ethan sat to the side and slightly back, which was deliberate. This was Victoria's conversation, and he was there as a presence, not a participant, and he'd figured that out before they'd gotten out of the truck. Marcus looked at Ethan once with the careful assessment of a man trying to understand context. Then he looked at Victoria. "He'll hurt my children," Marcus said. He said it without preamble, without Victoria having to ask the question, like he'd been having this conversation with himself for 6 months. "If I talk, if I go on record, he will find a way to—" "I know," Victoria said. "I know what he is. I know what he's capable of. Marcus, I'm not here to pretend it's safe. I'm here to tell you that the alternative is worse. The alternative is my children are fine. The alternative is Damian Mercer runs a company worth $47 billion with nothing standing between him and whatever he wants to do with it. And a man like that, with that much money and no accountability—" She stopped. "He won't leave you alone once he wins. He never leaves alone the people who know what he is. You've been hiding for 6 months. How much longer do you think hiding works?" Marcus looked at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. "What did he do?" Ethan said. He hadn't planned to speak, but he asked it simply, and Marcus looked at him like the question was the first honest thing anyone had said to him in months. "He redirected company funds," Marcus said, "over 5 years. Small amounts at first, the kind of small that fits inside normal variance that you'd have to know to look for. Then larger. Agricultural acquisition funds that were approved by the board for legitimate land purchases but directed instead into 3 shell companies that Damian controls. Land in the Southern District, valued on the books at acquisition price, but the actual parcels are—" He stopped, seemed to make a decision. "The actual parcels don't exist. They're paper land. The money's gone. Somewhere between $14 and $20 million over 5 years. The room was very still. "I need documentation," Victoria said. "The specific transactions, the shell company registrations, anything with his name attached." "I have it." "Marcus, I've had it," he said, "since April. I made copies before I left because I knew he'd come after me and I needed—" He looked at his hands again. "I didn't know what to do with it. I was afraid." "You can still be afraid," Ethan said. Both of them looked at him. Being afraid and doing it anyway aren't mutually exclusive. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Who are you?" "Ethan Cole. I'm her husband." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. "Robert talked about you." "So I hear," Ethan said. "He said—" Marcus stopped, seemed to reconsider. "He said you were the kind of man that a person could stand next to." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't have many of those left." The documentation was in a fireproof lockbox under the bed in the spare room. It took Marcus 20 minutes to retrieve it and another 10 to find the specific files Victoria needed. She sat at his kitchen table and went through them with the focused efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this, asking sharp, precise questions that Marcus answered in the careful language of someone who had been keeping a complete mental record for 6 months and was finally allowed to open it. Ethan made coffee. He did it in Marcus Webb's kitchen, like a man who was comfortable making himself useful in other people's spaces, which was something he had never been before, and apparently was now. And he filed that observation away for later examination. They left 3 hours later with digital copies of everything and Marcus Webb's commitment, shaky, hedged, dependent on the legal protection coming through, but a commitment nonetheless, to go on record if it reached a formal proceeding. Victoria was quiet for the first half hour of the drive back. She was looking at something on her laptop, but she wasn't reading it. Ethan could tell. She was thinking, and the thinking had a specific quality to it, a heaviness. "You okay?" he said. "He had it the whole time," she said. 6 months. I was being pushed out, being made to look unstable, running. My father's company was being stolen while I was defending myself against invented scandals, and the evidence was in a box under a bed in Elton. You found it. I found it 6 months late. You found it before the board meeting, he said. That's what matters. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. I know, you're right. She was quiet for a moment. I hate that I needed help. I'm not good at needing help. Nobody is, Ethan said. It just requires more practice. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. That's a very practical way to look at it. I'm a practical person. You are. A pause. Thank you. For today. For coming with me. Stop thanking me, he said. It makes it sound like something surprising. She looked at him sideways. Then she looked back at the road ahead and said nothing else. But the corner of her mouth did something. The drive back covered what the drive out hadn't. They stopped at a diner outside a small town because it was past noon and neither of them had eaten. It was the kind of diner that had been the same for 40 years. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that came in a pot the waitress refilled before you asked. They ate soup and bad sandwiches, and Ethan did not try to fill the silences, and Victoria did not either. And it was the most comfortable meal he'd had in longer than he could accurately calculate. 3 days later, the storm arrived. Not the snow was done. This was a different kind of storm. It came on a Tuesday evening, the kind of late November storm that the region got maybe once a decade. The meteorological alignment of a warm front from the south colliding with the hard cold that had been sitting over the county for 2 weeks. The Weather Service issued a severe warning at 4 in the afternoon, and Ethan spent 2 hours before dark securing what he could. The loose section of barn roof, the equipment he'd left in the south field, the generator cables he'd need if the power went. He had a system for this. He'd been through bad storms before. What he hadn't been through before was doing it with someone who refused to stay inside. I can help, Victoria said, appearing at the barn door in her coat. You can help by staying with Lily, he said. Mrs. Patterson is with Lily. Victoria, tell me what to do, she said. He looked at her for a second, the wind already building behind her, pulling at her hair. The animals in the east pen need to be moved to the main barn. The gate latch on that pen is tricky. You have to lift and push at the same time. Show me. He showed her. She got it on the 3rd try. He went to the roof and she went to the pen, and for 40 minutes they worked in the building storm. And he could hear her talking to the goats. Calmly, practically, the way you talk to animals when you're not performing but just filling the air so they don't panic. And he made himself focus on the roof and not on that. The wind hit full force at 9 in the evening. Lily was asleep. Mrs. Patterson was in the guest room. The power flickered twice and held. Ethan and Victoria sat in the kitchen with the lights on and the sound of the wind doing things to the old farmhouse that the old farmhouse was built to handle but complained about nonetheless. The windows shook. Something metallic, probably the equipment cover on the east side, was making a rhythmic banging noise that meant it had come loose. I'll check it in this morning, Ethan said before she could ask. I wasn't going to say anything, she said. You were looking at the window. I was looking at the window, she admitted. They played cards for a while. Victoria was good at cards in the competitive way, not the casual way, and she'd beaten him twice at rummy before he'd recalibrated to the fact that she was actually trying to win and started paying proper attention. The 3rd game was closer. Lily had taught Victoria a game she'd invented herself, the rules of which were inconsistent but enthusiastically enforced, and they'd played that too. And it had ended in a dispute about whether 3 of a kind beat 2 pairs when the pairs were what Lily called friendly pairs, which apparently meant she liked them better. It was 10:30 when the sound changed outside. The bang of the loose equipment cover was suddenly much louder, and then there was a different sound. Not equipment, not wind, but a sharp crack that Ethan recognized as wood, which was structural, which was not fine. He was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to move. "Stay inside," he said. "What is it?" "Stay inside." He grabbed his coat and his flashlight and went out the back door into the full force of the storm. It was not a nice storm. The wind hit him like a wall the second he stepped off the porch, cold and mean, and carrying rain that was more horizontal than vertical. He got the flashlight aimed toward the east side of the barn and saw immediately what had happened. The old oak tree that stood at the corner of the barn lot, the one that had a significant crack running up the main trunk that he'd been meaning to address for 2 years, had partially split. A major branch, maybe 30 feet of it, had come down across the corner of the fence line and taken out 2 fence posts and was currently sitting against the barn wall with the full weight of a mature oak limb, which was considerable. He needed to assess the barn wall. If the structure was compromised, the animals needed to be moved. He went toward it. He heard the door behind him. He turned, and Victoria was on the porch, still in her inside clothes, holding her coat like she'd grabbed it as she came out. "I told you to stay inside," he said loudly, over the wind. "I heard wood cracking. Go back inside. I need to check the barn, and I can't do that and watch you at the same time. I'm not asking you to watch me." And then he heard it. Another crack, above and behind her, in the dark. A different sound, faster, the sound of wood separating under a load it couldn't hold. His flashlight found it in the split second before it mattered. A second branch, smaller than the first but heavy enough, coming off the upper section of the oak, directly above where Victoria was standing at the edge of the porch. He moved. He covered the distance in a way that he did not think about and could not have explained because there was no thought in it. It was just action, just the fact of being between her and the thing that was falling, and he hit her at shoulder height and took them both off the porch and down into the mud at the side of the house, just as the branch came down and hit the porch railing with a sound like a gunshot, and splintered the wood of the top step into 4 pieces. They were on the ground, in the mud, in the rain. The wind was still going, and somewhere above them the oak tree was making ominous noises about its future intentions, and Ethan had Victoria underneath him, and his hand was at the back of her head where he'd put it to protect it from the ground, and they were both breathing very fast. "Are you okay?" he said. It was not a question, exactly. It was more like a statement that needed confirmation. "Yes," she said. "Yes." "Are you fine?" Neither of them moved for a second. The rain came down and the wind went through, and the porch light above them was still on, casting this strange yellow light over the broken railing and the downed branch and the 2 of them in the mud. He could feel her heartbeat, or maybe that was his own, he wasn't sure. They were close enough together that it was genuinely unclear. He became aware that he was shaking, not from cold, not from the physical effort. He was shaking because the branch had been right there. It had been right above her. And if he'd turned 1 second later, or if he'd been 2 steps farther away, or if the wind had pushed it at a slightly different angle, "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. Her face was 6 inches from his in the rain, hair soaked, mud along one cheek, and she was looking at him with an expression he didn't have a category for. "I'm shaking," he said. He said it because it was true, and he didn't know what else to say. "I know," she said. "I can feel it. It's not. I know what it is," she said quietly. He looked at her face in the porch light and the rain, and the thought of losing her, not the abstract idea of it, but the specific, physical, present tense reality of what had almost just happened, moved through him like something breaking open, like something he'd been holding shut for a very long time giving way all at once, and he couldn't hold it, or manage it, or file it away for later because it was just there, right there, the size of the truth of it. "Victoria," he said. "Yes," she said. Just yes. Like she knew the question before he asked it. He kissed her. Not the way people kiss in movies, not perfectly composed. It was rain and mud and shaking hands, and neither of them had the angle right at first, and Victoria made a small, startled sound against his mouth that turned into something else very quickly, and the wind was still doing what the wind did, and the oak tree was still half collapsed in the lot, and none of that mattered at all. When they stopped, they were still on the ground, and the rain had not stopped. "We should probably get up," Victoria said. "Yeah," he said, and didn't move for another moment. "The barn," she said. "Right, the barn." They got up. They were both completely soaked and covered in mud, and the porch step was in 4 pieces, and the oak branch was across the fence line, and there was a substantial amount of work that needed to happen before morning. But she was standing. She was standing right in front of him, mud on her cheek, looking at him with that expression that he still didn't have a category for, but was beginning to think was its own category, specific to this, specific to her. "The barn," he said again. "Go," she said. "I'll get towels." He went to the barn. The wall had taken the branch impact along a secondary beam that had flexed but held, structurally sound, he was 90% sure, could confirm in morning light. The animals were disturbed but unhurt. He moved 2 of the goats who'd gotten into the wrong pen and secured the inner doors against the wind and checked the roof load from inside. When he came back to the house, Victoria was in the kitchen with towels and had made tea. They stood in the kitchen doorway and dried off, and Ethan's hands had stopped shaking and the tree outside was still making noise, but the worst of the storm was moving east. She handed him a towel and didn't say anything, and he took it and dried his face, and they stood in the kitchen with the storm winding down outside and the house quiet around them, and he looked at her and she looked at him. Later, much later, when the storm was finished and the house was settled, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his cold tea and thought about what it meant to have kissed someone in the rain and the mud out of sheer terror, turned into something else, and what happened after the shaking stopped and the tree was down and the mud was off and the thing was still there, still real, in the ordinary kitchen light. It did not resolve cleanly. He had known that it wouldn't. What he knew, sitting in the quiet house in the dark after midnight, was that the arrangement he'd proposed in this kitchen 6 weeks ago had become something else. He wasn't sure when. He wasn't sure it had been a single moment or a long accumulation of small ones. A coffee mug on the rack, a laugh at the farmer's market, a child's stuffed rabbit in the center of the table, a drive to Elton and back, mud and rain, and a branch and the specific terror of almost. He thought about all the things they hadn't said, the agreement, the arrangement, the conditions, the rules about what this was and wasn't. Then he thought about the look on her face when he'd kissed her, and the way she'd said yes before he'd asked a question. He finished his cold tea. He rinsed the mug and placed it upside down on the drying rack, the way she did. Then he went upstairs, and the loose board near the door made its familiar sound. And somewhere down the hall, Lily was asleep in the sound way that children sleep in the middle of storms, and the tree outside was still down, and in the morning there would be a lot of work to do. There always was. But something in the house was different. He lay in bed and looked at the water stain on the ceiling that was shaped like a boot, and for the first time in 4 years he wasn't thinking about the photograph on the nightstand. He was thinking about the kitchen and the rain and what happens after something you've been holding shut finally opens. Sleep came eventually. It came easier than it had in months. The morning after the storm, they didn't talk about the kiss. Not because they were avoiding it exactly, or maybe they were a little, but because the morning after a major storm on a working farm doesn't allow for much that isn't physical and immediate. The downed oak branch had taken out 8 feet of fence line and was wedged against the barn wall at an angle that required a chainsaw and 2 hours of careful work before it was safe to move. The equipment cover that had been banging loose all night had come off entirely and was sitting in the north field 60 yards from where it belonged. 2 of the chickens had gotten through a gap in the pen that the branch had created, and one of them, the aggressive one that Lily had named Colonel Mustard, had apparently spent the night in the barn loft and required negotiation to remove. Ethan worked. Victoria worked beside him. They handed each other tools and moved things that required 2 people and didn't fill the air with words that weren't necessary. There was something between them now that hadn't been there before. Not a wall, the opposite of a wall, which was also something that required careful navigation, and they were both, in their different ways, being careful. By noon, the worst of the storm damage was managed. Not repaired, that would take several more days, but contained. The fence was temporarily patched. The equipment cover was back. Colonel Mustard was back in his pen, furious about it. They came inside and ate lunch standing at the counter because there was nowhere to sit. Lily had commandeered the table for what she was calling a very important project, that appeared to involve cutting paper into shapes and arranging them by color, a project that had been ongoing for 40 minutes and showed no signs of resolution. "What's it going to be?" Victoria asked her, looking at the arrangement. "A map," Lily said, without looking up. "Of what?" "The farm. But the farm how it should look." Ethan looked at the paper shapes. There was a green rectangle he assumed was the main field, a brown square that was probably the barn, and a cluster of small shapes near the center that he couldn't identify. "What are those?" he asked, pointing. "That's us," Lily said, matter-of-factly. "Me and you and Miss Vicky." Neither adult said anything for a moment. "We're very small," Victoria observed. "Everyone is small on a map," Lily said, with the tolerant patience of someone explaining something obvious. Ethan finished his sandwich and looked at the wall above the sink and thought about what it meant that his 6-year-old had already placed them on a map together, the three of them, clustered in the center of the farm like they were a permanent feature of it. He thought about the arrangement he'd proposed in this kitchen 8 weeks ago, and the conditions they'd agreed on, and how those conditions had become progressively more theoretical as each week went by. He thought about last night in the rain. Victoria caught his eye across the kitchen. She looked at the paper map, then at him. Something passed between them that was too specific and too private for a room that also contained a 6-year-old with scissors. "I'll check the south fence this afternoon," he said. "I'll come," she said. "It's muddy." "I know what mud is," she said, and went to put on her boots. They talked about it that evening, after Lily was asleep and Mrs. Patterson had gone home. Not dramatically, no declarations, no long speeches. They sat at the kitchen table with the kind of directness that was the only way either of them knew how to operate, and they acknowledged that what had happened in the rain had not been part of the arrangement, and also that the arrangement had, somewhere in the past 8 weeks, ceased to be the primary thing. "I'm not good at this," Ethan said. He meant relationships, or whatever this was becoming, but he said it because it was true, and she deserved honesty more than she deserved smooth. "Good at what specifically?" she said. "Saying the right thing, feeling something, and knowing what to do with it." "I'm not either," she said. "I spent my 20s in a company. I had one real relationship and it ended because I worked too much and cared too little. And I have been not good at this for years." "So we're both not good at it," he said. "Apparently. And we're also—" "Yes," she said. "We're also." He nodded. She nodded. It was not a love declaration. It was two people who were bad at this acknowledging that they were in it anyway, which was maybe the most honest version of the conversation available to them at that particular moment, and it was enough. It was actually more than enough. "We have 3 weeks before the board meeting," she said, which was not a change of subject so much as a folding of both things together into the reality they were actually living. "I know. I need to focus on that. I know that too. This, what's happening, doesn't change what Mercer is doing." "Victoria," he said, "I'm not asking you to choose between them. I'm not that fragile." She looked at him. "I know you're not. I have a tendency to manage things in order of urgency, and I don't want you to feel like you're not managing me," he said. "Go handle Mercer. I'll be here." The corner of her mouth did that thing. "You're very uncomplicated for a complicated person." "Thank you," he said, though he wasn't sure it was a compliment. "It is one," she said, which meant she'd read the uncertainty, which was its own kind of unsettling. 3 weeks. They had 3 weeks. Damian Mercer did not give them 3 weeks. The first sign came 8 days after the storm, on a Thursday morning when Ethan was getting Lily ready for school, and Victoria was already on her first call of the day, pacing the living room with her phone in one hand and her legal pad in the other the way she did when things were moving fast. He heard the call cut off. Then he heard her walking fast, which was different from her regular walking, and she appeared in the kitchen doorway with an expression he hadn't seen before, not fear, something harder than fear. "He moved the board meeting," she said. "It was December 14th. He's moved it to next Thursday." Lily looked up from her cereal. Ethan looked at Victoria. "Can he do that?" "He has enough board allies to call an emergency session. He needs 2/3 of the board to call it, and he has exactly 2/3 because Harrison retired in October and his replacement is Damian's man." She put the legal pad on the counter. "He knows I have something, not what, But he knows I've been meeting with financial contacts, and he knows Marcus broke from him. Someone told him. Marcus? No. Marcus is scared, but he's committed. Someone else. There's a leak somewhere in my contact network that I haven't found. She stopped. He's forcing the timeline because he knows if I get to December 14th with everything I have, he's done. So he's moving to eliminate me before I'm ready. How ready are you? Ethan said. 70%. I need the 2 remaining board members, Paulson and Chen, to agree to hear my evidence before the vote. If they agree to hear it, the others follow. But they're cautious and they've been managed by Damien's people, and I haven't been able to get them on a call. What do they need to agree? They need to see me in person, functional and credible, not the wreck the tabloids have been selling. She met his eyes. And they need to see that I'm not what Damien says I am, that I have a real life, a real structure, that I'm making considered choices, not erratic ones. Daddy, Lily said, what time is school? 10 minutes, he said, without looking away from Victoria. Where are they? Paulson is in the city. Chen is attending a dinner event Saturday. It's public industry event. I can get tickets. Then we go Saturday, he said. Ethan, this is a formal event. It's not I own a blue shirt and a sport coat, he said. I'll figure it out. She stared at him. I'm serious. So am I. Lily climbed off her chair and put her bowl in the sink, which she'd recently started doing without being asked, a development Ethan attributed to Victoria's influence and felt complicated things about in the best way. Miss Vicky, Lily said, can you braid my hair today? Victoria looked at the legal pad and the phone and the 10 things she needed to do in the next 10 minutes, and then she looked at Lily. Sit down, she said, and picked up the comb. Ethan watched her braid his daughter's hair in the morning kitchen, with the phone buzzing ignored on the counter, and thought, there it is again. That thing I don't have a name for. He thought it and didn't try to name it this time. He just let it be what it was. The Saturday dinner was held at the Harrington Club, which was the kind of place where the carpet was the same shade of green it had been since 1987, and everyone in the room had known each other for 20 years. Victoria wore a deep blue dress that she'd had delivered, and she looked, objectively, like the CEO of a $47 billion company. Ethan wore the sport coat and the blue shirt and the one pair of dark slacks he owned, and he looked like what he was, a farmer who had put on his best clothes for an important occasion. He was aware of this. He was aware of it the moment they walked in, and the room made its micro-adjustments. The small turns of heads, the recalibrations of expression, the particular way wealthy people process an unexpected element in a familiar environment. He felt the scar, the way he sometimes felt it in rooms like this, like a thing being noticed and assessed. He kept his chin level. He put his hand on the small of Victoria's back, and he walked in like he was exactly as certain of his right to be there as he was on his own land, which was to say, completely. Victoria found Chen within 8 minutes. Dr. Angela Chen was 63, small, formidably composed, and looked at Ethan with the frank assessment of someone who had not achieved her position by being polite about uncertainty. Mr. Cole, she said, I've read about you. I imagine you have, he said. Most of it's wrong. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not yet, but something adjacent. What's right? I run a farm in Briar Ridge. I've been doing it for 8 years. I married this woman because I believed in her judgment, and I've seen nothing in 2 months to change that view. He looked at her steadily. She's the right person to run that company. If you've been watching her for any length of time and haven't seen that, I think maybe someone's been managing what you see. The dinner went from 3 hours. Victoria had 40 minutes with Chen away from the main tables, which Ethan spent in conversation with a man named Theodore, who ran a farming cooperative in the Northern District and wanted to talk about soil amendment techniques, which was actually a relief. Theodore did not know or care about Damien Mercer or the Langford Board or any of it, and the conversation about soil was clean and technical, and Ethan was very good at it. When Victoria came back, her eyes were different. Chen's going to listen, she said quietly. She wants the documentation sent by Monday. And Paulson? I'll call him tomorrow. Chen said she'd put in a word. He handed her a glass of water because she'd been talking for 40 minutes straight, and she took it and drank half of it without stopping, and he thought, she's going to win this. She was always going to win this. She just needed the time. Paulson agreed to a call Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, both of them had received the documentation package Victoria's attorney had prepared. By Tuesday, Victoria had a confirmed 30-minute slot to address the board at the beginning of the emergency session. Damian Mercer found out about Marcus Webb on Wednesday. Ethan didn't know how. A leak somewhere, Victoria said, the same leak that had told Mercer she was gathering evidence. But Mercer knew that the accountant had turned, and Mercer's response was immediate and physical, in a way that moved the conflict from the realm of boardrooms into something that Ethan understood better and found more straightforward to respond to. They came for the barn at 2 a.m. on Wednesday night. Ethan woke to the smell before he heard anything. He'd grown up on a farm and he knew what burning smelled like, and his body had him out of bed and moving before his mind had fully assembled the situation. He pulled on jeans and went to the window and saw the orange light at the east side of the barn, the specific flickering that meant something was burning that was not supposed to be burning. He pulled on boots and grabbed his phone and shouted down the hallway, "Victoria, call 911, fire in the barn," and went out the back door running. The barn was not on fire yet. What was on fire was the equipment shed attached to the east side, old dry wood burning hard and fast, and there were 2 men. One was backing away from the shed with a gas can. The other was running toward the barn door. Ethan hit the first one at full speed. The man was bigger than him and didn't expect it and went down hard. The gas can went skidding across the gravel. Ethan got to his feet before the man did and put himself between the man and the barn door. "Don't," Ethan said. The man had a flashlight and a face Ethan didn't know. He looked at Ethan, at the scar, at the set of him, and made a calculation. He ran. Both of them ran, actually, the second one apparently deciding the job wasn't worth it the moment things went physical, and they went over the far fence and into the dark field, and Ethan did not chase them because he had a fire to deal with. He got the hose. Victoria came out 2 minutes later. She'd called 911, and she came out anyway, because she was not a person who stayed inside. And she took the second hose from the external tap on the north wall, and they fought the fire with garden hoses in the dark for 11 minutes until the county volunteer fire department arrived with equipment that was actually useful. The equipment shed was gone, total loss. The barn wall was scorched but intact. The fire had not gotten into the main structure. The sheriff arrived with the fire department. His name was Briggs, and he was a practical, direct man who had known Ethan for years and who listened to Ethan's description of the 2 men without interrupting. Victoria gave her own account. She also, calmly and specifically, told Sheriff Briggs about Damian Mercer, the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning, and her precise reasoning for why she believed this was not a random act. Briggs listened. He wrote things down. He looked at the gas can, which was still on the gravel exactly where it had landed, and said, "Prince, if we're lucky." "You'll want to move quickly," Victoria said. "He has lawyers who can complicate things once they know we've made a report." "Ma'am," Briggs said, with the particular patience of someone who was aware he was operating next to a level of legal complexity he didn't usually encounter, "I'm going to do my job." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. I know." It was 4 a.m. by the time the fire department left, and the sheriff's people had done what they needed to do. Ethan stood in the gravel lot and looked at the burned shed and the scorched barn wall and felt a specific cold anger that was different from the hot kind. Not reactive, not urgent, just settled and clear. He had built this farm and maintained it through hard years, and it had come through intact, and a man he'd never met had sent people in the dark to try to take pieces of it. He thought about Damian Mercer, sitting somewhere comfortable and distant, making calculations about what Ethan Cole would and wouldn't do. He thought Mercer had made a mistake. Victoria came and stood beside him. She was wearing her coat over her pajamas, and her hair was loose, and she had ash on the arm of her coat from when she'd been too close to the shed. She looked at the damage for a long moment without saying anything. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said. "This is because of me." "This is because of him," Ethan said. "Those are different things." She was quiet. "The board meeting is in 6 hours," he said. "I know. Can you still function in 6 hours?" She looked at him, something tired and determined and quite specific in her expression. "Can you?" "Always," he said. He called his neighbor Ray Dobbins at 5 a.m. because Ray was up at 4:30 anyway, and because Ray was 65 years old and had a face like a relief map and had worked adjacent land for 30 years and had a way with situations that required a calm and practical man. He explained what had happened, briefly, and Ray said, "I'll be there in 15 minutes," without being asked to come, which was exactly what Ethan needed. By the time Victoria had showered and changed and was preparing her documentation at the kitchen table, Ray was at the farm with his truck and his own coffee thermos and a willingness to manage things in Ethan's absence for the day. Ethan explained what needed watching: the barn wall, the animals, Lily, who was awake now and aware something had happened but had been told only that there had been a small fire and it was handled. Lily looked at Ethan's face when he said this and said, "Was it actually small?" "The shed is gone, Pict," he said, "but the barn is fine and the animals are fine and we are all fine." "Why did it start?" "We're still figuring that out." She looked at him the way she sometimes looked at him, with those eyes that were her mother's eyes. "Daddy, why is Miss Vicky's face like that?" He crouched down to her level. "Because she's worried and she feels responsible for something that isn't her fault. And she needs to go do something important today, and it would help her a lot if she knew you were okay." Lily thought about this with the serious attention she gave to things that actually mattered. Then she went to the kitchen where Victoria was sitting with her documents and climbed up on the chair beside her. "I'm okay," Lily said. Victoria looked at her. "Daddy said you needed to know I was okay," Lily said. "So I'm okay." Something happened in Victoria's face that was private and total, and she put one arm around Lily and held on for a moment, and Ethan watched from the doorway and turned away because some things are not meant to be witnessed directly, just known. They drove to the city. Ethan drove. Victoria sat in the passenger seat reviewing her notes, and the truck rattled the way it always did over 40, and nobody said much. There was nothing to say that wasn't already understood. The Langford Company headquarters was a glass tower in the financial district that looked exactly like what it was: old money that had learned to speak in modern architecture. They parked in a visitor spot and walked in, and the lobby was marble and security and the particular atmosphere of institutional power that Ethan found neither impressive nor intimidating, just information about the environment he was in. The boardroom was on the 32nd floor. Damian Mercer was already there. Ethan had been forming a picture of the man from everything Victoria had described, from the accountant's testimony, from the articles, and the actual person both matched the picture and surprised him. Mercer was 60, silver-haired, with the smooth, well-maintained look of a man who had spent decades in rooms like this and knew exactly how to fill them. He was flanked by two lawyers, and he looked at Victoria when she walked in with the particular expression of a man who is controlling his surprise and not quite succeeding. His eyes moved to Ethan. He looked at the scar. He processed Ethan the way people processed him: the farm clothes, the hands, the face. And then he looked away with the dismissive efficiency of someone who had already decided what he was seeing. That was his second mistake. Victoria took her seat at the table. Ethan sat beside her, which was not the arrangement anyone expected. She'd been allocated a seat on one side of the table, and Mercer had clearly expected her to be alone on it. And Mercer's lead lawyer leaned over and said something to Mercer in a low voice, and Mercer looked at Ethan again with a recalibrated expression. "Mr. Cole," Mercer said, smooth, controlled. "This is a board proceeding. Your presence here is—" "My wife is addressing this board," Ethan said. "I'm here in support of my wife. If that's a problem, someone will need to show me the bylaw that makes it one." One of the board members, Chen, sitting across the table, gave him the smallest nod. Mercer let it go. Victoria presented for 22 minutes. She had been building toward this for 8 months, and it showed, not in slickness or performance, but in the controlled precision of someone who knew exactly what they had and exactly how to show it. The shell companies, the redirected funds, Marcus Webb's account, presented via written statement from his attorney. The financial trail that Damian Mercer had constructed over 5 years and that had been documented, verified, and organized into a package that would have impressed anyone who understood what they were looking at. Damian Mercer understood what he was looking at. He tried 3 times to interrupt. His lawyer tried twice. Chen and Paulson, sitting together on the north side of the table, let none of it land. When Victoria finished, the room was quiet. "This documentation," Mercer said, "has been compiled by a hostile party and should be treated as—" "This documentation," said Chen, "appears to contain your direct signature on 4 separate fund transfer authorizations to companies that do not appear to exist. I would like to understand that before any vote takes place." "Angela, the vote is tabled," Paulson said. He was looking at the documents on the table in front of him. until an independent audit can be completed. He looked up. Mr. Mercer, I'd suggest you discuss next steps with your attorneys. Mercer looked at Victoria. It was the look of a man who had spent 5 years building a structure and had just watched it diagnosed as unstable in a 22-minute presentation, and whatever was in his face in that moment, it was not composure. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is, Victoria said quietly. You just don't know it yet. The meeting ended. People filed out. One of the younger board members, a woman named Simone who had been at Langford for 3 years and had apparently been waiting for exactly this, stopped to squeeze Victoria's arm on the way out, which said something about the room's general temperature. Ethan and Victoria were the last to leave the boardroom. They stood for a moment in the empty room with the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, gray December sky outside, the table still covered with the documentation she'd spent months assembling. That's it, he said. The audit will take a few weeks, she said. The formal removal will require a full board vote. But yes, essentially, that's it. He doesn't have the votes anymore, and now everyone in that room knows what he is. How are you? She thought about it, which was one of the things he respected about her. She actually considered the question rather than reflexively answering. Tired, she said, and very, very glad it's done. And also a little... She stopped. What? When you said that thing to Mercer about your wife, her voice was careful. How you said it. It's the legal truth, he said. I know, she said. I know it is. Something in how she said it, and something in how he looked at her when she said it, made it a different kind of truth than the legal kind. And they both knew it, and neither of them needed to say so, because they had been not saying things like this for 2 months in a kitchen on a farm, and they were both fluent in the language of it by now. They drove back to Briar Ridge in the late afternoon, the city giving way to suburbs, giving way to the flat fields that Ethan knew better than anywhere else on Earth. The truck rattled. The heater worked, mostly. The cracked window with its electrical tape let a thin, cold line of air in on the passenger side that Victoria had started just accepting as part of the ride. The shed, she said, somewhere around mile 40. Insurance will cover it, eventually. I'll cover it, she said. Victoria. I will cover it, she said, not belligerent, just definite. It was burned because of what I was doing. That is not something you should absorb. He drove. He thought about how to argue with this and found that he didn't want to. Not out of agreement, exactly, but because the impulse behind it was real, and he wasn't going to fight her real impulses. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Okay? You said you'd cover it? I said, okay. I'm trying to practice receiving help. A pause. You said I needed to practice it. It applies to both of us, apparently. She made that sound that was almost a laugh. He kept his eyes on the road. They came back to the farm at 5:30 with the light going gold and flat across the white fields, the way December light went at that hour. Ray's truck was still there. Lily came running out of the house before the truck stopped, coat half on, Gregory the rabbit in one hand, screaming something about how Ray had taught her to play checkers, and she had lost 6 times in a row, and she believed this was because the rules were unfair. The rules of checkers are 100 years old, Ethan said, climbing out. That's exactly the problem, Lily said. Ray appeared on the porch, drinking coffee, looking at them both with the weathered assessment of a man who had figured out what kind of day it had been from the look of them. Everything good? He said. Everything good, Ethan said. Ray nodded, said his goodbyes. Lily grabbed Victoria's hand and started telling her about checkers, the injustice of it, the specific losing moves, the whole story from the beginning. Ethan stood in the driveway in the December cold and watched them go inside, his daughter's voice carrying back to him on the cold air, and he looked at the scorched side of the barn and the gap where the shed had been. The farm was still standing. That had always been the measure, not perfect, not unchanged, but standing. He'd kept it standing through everything the past years had thrown at it, and today he'd done that again, in a different kind of way and with more help than he was used to. And the scorched wall would need to be repaired, and the shed would need to be rebuilt, and the insurance would take months, and all of that was true. But the barn was standing. The animals were fine. His daughter was inside arguing about checkers with the woman who had arrived on his porch 8 weeks ago with a dead man's name on a piece of paper and a bruise on her jaw and nowhere else to go. He stood there for one moment in the cold, in the particular stillness of a December farm at the end of a hard day. Then he went inside where it was warm, because that was where they were. The audit took 19 days. Ethan knew this because Victoria had a calendar on her laptop that she updated with the precision of someone who had learned, through hard experience, that vague timelines were how things slipped. She marked every day of the audit period. She marked the dates of the investigators' check-ins, the expected deliverable windows, the board reconvening date. She had a system, and she worked it, and Ethan had come to understand that this was how she managed fear. Not by pretending it wasn't there, but by converting it into structure, into tasks, into the next concrete thing that could be done. He recognized this. He did the same thing with the farm. December moved, the way December moved in that part of the country, gray and cold and short on daylight, the kind of month that required deliberate effort to find anything good in. Ethan found it in the usual places. Lily's voice in the mornings, the particular silence of the frozen fields before sunrise, the way coffee tasted when it was cold outside. He found it in new places too, places that hadn't been available to him 2 months ago. The sound of Victoria on a call in the next room, professional and precise. A voice that had learned to carry authority without sharpness. The evenings when Lily had been put to bed and they sat in the kitchen with the day done around them, not always talking, sometimes just there together in the ordinary quiet of a house that had 2 adults in it again. He didn't rush any of it. He was not built for rushing. What he was built for was endurance, and it turned out that endurance applied to the good things as well as the hard ones. You could be patient with happiness the same way you were patient with difficulty. Let it develop at its own pace without grabbing at it. This patience was tested in the second week of December when the story broke nationally. A journalist, not the Preston who'd come to the farm, someone more credible, from a publication that actually checked things, published a detailed account of the Mercer investigation. The source was not Victoria, who had maintained careful discipline about not talking to press during the audit. The source appeared to be someone inside the audit firm, or possibly one of the board members who had their own reasons for wanting the story out before Mercer's lawyers could get ahead of it. Whatever the source, the story was comprehensive and accurate. The shell companies, the redirected funds, the 5 years of systematic theft, Marcus Webb's testimony, the emergency board meeting, all of it. By the evening the story published, it had 200,000 shares online. By the next morning, it had twice that. By the end of the week, 3 major financial news outlets had run follow-ups, and the state attorney general's office had announced they were opening a formal inquiry. Damian Mercer had not spoken publicly since the board meeting. His lawyers had. They released statements using phrases like strenuously disputes and selective presentation of evidence and context that has not been fully explored, which were the phrases lawyers used when they were buying time before the thing became undeniable. Ethan read the coverage on his phone in the barn one morning, in the particular privacy of early work before anyone else was up, and felt something that was not quite satisfaction, closer to recognition. He'd grown up watching his father deal with people who use systems to pressure those who didn't have equal access to those systems. And what Damian Mercer had done was that pattern on a billion-dollar scale. He'd isolated Victoria, removed her supports one by one, tried to make her look like her own worst problem so that no one would look at what he was doing. It was the oldest play. It worked until it didn't. It didn't work because she hadn't stayed isolated. She'd come to a farm in October with a dead man's name on a piece of paper, and she'd knocked on a door and asked for help, which was the hardest thing she'd ever done. She'd told him that directly one evening, just stated it without drama, and that one decision had changed the entire trajectory of everything that followed. He thought about that. He thought about the version of events where she didn't knock, where she was too proud or too frightened or too far inside the isolation to find the door. He didn't spend long thinking about it because he didn't like what he found there, but he thought about it long enough to understand what it meant that she had. The audit results were delivered on December 19th. The auditors confirmed everything. $14.7 million redirected over 5 years to 3 shell companies registered in 2 different states, none of which owned any actual land. The purchase records had been falsified at the source by Mercer's own hand, or rather by his administrative accounts, which he had failed to fully clean in the belief that no one would ever look. He had believed he was too well positioned to be seriously investigated. This was the specific arrogance of people who had operated without consequences for long enough that they'd stopped being able to imagine consequences. The full board met on December 21st. Victoria flew to the city for it. Ethan drove her to the airport at 5 in the morning, and she got out of the truck in the airport departure lane and stood there for a second with her bag on her shoulder and looked at him through the passenger window. "I'll be back tonight," she said. "I know," he said. "Lily wants tacos for dinner. Lily always wants tacos. I told her I'd bring the good salsa." She paused. "The kind from the place in the city. She's going to remember you said that." "I know, that's why I said it." A beat. "Ethan, go," he said. "You've been building to this for a year. Go do it." She looked at him for one more second, then turned and walked into the terminal. He drove back to the farm in the dark. He made breakfast. He got Lily to school. He fixed the section of the barn wall that the fire had scorched, which he'd been patching incrementally since December, working in the cold with his breath showing and the radio going in the barn, doing the work that needed doing the way he had always done the work that needed doing. At noon, Lily called him from school. She was allowed to use the school phone for this once a week, a privilege she had negotiated with the precision of someone studying under Victoria Langford, to ask whether Miss Vicky had called yet. "Not yet," he said. "When?" "When she's done." "How long does a board meeting take?" "Depends on what they're deciding." "That's not a real answer." "I know. Go eat lunch." Victoria called at 2:17 in the afternoon. Ethan was in the south field checking the irrigation line he'd been meaning to address since September, and he answered on the second ring. "It's done," she said. He stopped walking. "Tell me." "Unanimous vote. Mercer is removed, effective immediately, and the board has referred the findings to the Attorney General. The formal criminal referral will come from the audit firm by end of year." A pause, and in the pause, he could hear something in her breath that she was controlling. "I've been confirmed as CEO, officially. Not interim, not provisional. The vote was 12-0. 12-0, he said. Chen moved it. Paulson seconded. It was... She stopped. It was fast. Once it started, it was very fast, like everyone had been waiting. "They had been," he said. "They just needed to see you hold." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, the control had slipped a little, which was not weakness, just the specific thing that happens when something you've been braced against for a very long time suddenly isn't there to brace against anymore. "My father would have..." she started, and then stopped. "I know," Ethan said. "I kept thinking about him in there. Stupid." "Not stupid. I kept thinking what he would have said." "What would he have said?" A short sound that was both a laugh and something else. "He would have said, 'Stop looking at me. You have a meeting to finish.'" He was not a sentimental man in the moment. "Sounds like someone else I know," Ethan said. "I'm not unsentimental," she said with a precision that made him smile. "The good salsa," he said. "Don't forget." "I already bought it," she said. "I bought it before the meeting." He stood in the south field with the cold December sky above him and the frozen ground under his boots, and he thought, she bought the salsa before the meeting. In the middle of the most important day of her professional life, she'd thought about Lily's tacos. He didn't say what that made him feel because he was standing in a field alone, and also because some things you held for a little while before you said them out loud. "Drive safe," he said. "The county road floods at the second intersection." "I know," she said. "You tell me every time." And yet, she agreed and hung up. She got back at 7:30 with the salsa and a tiredness in her face that went all the way down to the bone, the kind of tired that comes after a very long, sustained effort finally stops being necessary. Lily met her at the door with Gregory the rabbit, and a series of immediate questions about the meeting that she had clearly been composing all day, and Victoria answered them with patience and accuracy at a level calibrated for a 6-year-old, which was not condescending but just true to what Lily needed. And Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway watching this and made himself turn around and start the tacos. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, with Lily conducting a detailed explanation of what she had learned that day about volcanoes, specifically the underground kind, which her teacher had apparently described in terms that Lily found inadequate and had been supplementing with her own research. Victoria asked questions. Ethan asked questions. Lily explained. The salsa was, objectively, better than what he bought at the county store, and he wasn't going to say that out loud, but it was true. This was Tuesday. What happened that changed something finally and irrevocably happened on Friday. It was a simple thing. Most of the things that change you turn out to be simple when you look at them afterward. Not the dramatic moments, not the storms and the fires and the boardrooms, but the small, specific moments that arrive without announcement and land with total finality. Ethan was in the barn at 6:30 in the morning, doing the first feed of the day, and he could hear through the thin wall between the barn and the house the sounds of the kitchen, running water, the particular cabinet squeak that was the one where the cereal was kept, and then Lily's voice and Victoria's voice in the kind of morning exchange that is half language and half sound, the call and response of two people who have learned each other's morning rhythms. He stood in the barn with the feed bucket in his hand and listened to his daughter laugh at something. Genuinely laugh, the real kind, not the performed kind. And he thought, this is what she should have had all along. This is what I couldn't give her alone, no matter how hard I tried. He tried very hard. He wanted to be honest about that. He had been present and consistent, and he'd shown up every day without exception, and those things mattered, and Lily knew they mattered. But there was a specific thing that a child needs that is not about individual effort, that is about the quality of a whole environment, the way a house feels when it holds more than one kind of love, and he had not been able to manufacture that by himself, and he'd known it and not known what to do about it. He put down the feed bucket. He stood in the barn for a moment in the quiet. He'd been afraid of this. Not of Victoria specifically, of what she represented, of what it meant to let someone matter this much again, of the specific and well-documented risk of loving something and then losing it. He'd built his life around that fear's management. Small, contained, the farm, Lily, the work, real things, solid things, things that wouldn't leave the way people left. He'd been wrong about the strategy. Not wrong that the fear was real. It was real. It was always going to be real. You didn't survive what he'd survived and come out without that fear embedded somewhere permanent. But wrong about the conclusion he'd drawn from it. He'd concluded that the way to manage loss was to minimize the things that could be lost. He'd confused smallness with safety. He went inside. Victoria was at the counter with coffee, and Lily was eating cereal, and Gregory was on the table again, which Ethan had stopped fighting months ago. "Morning," Victoria said, without turning from the counter. "Morning. Coffee's hot." "I need to ask you something," he said. She turned. Something in his voice, probably. She looked at him with the direct attention she gave to things that actually mattered. Lily looked up from her cereal. "Are we getting a dog?" "Lily," he said, "I've been thinking about it, and I think we should—" "Not right now." "The timing. Lily, give me a minute." She looked between the two of them with the assessment of a 6-year-old who was aware something was happening and was deciding whether to be interested or concerned. She picked up her cereal bowl and said, with remarkable dignity, "I'll eat in the living room," and carried Gregory and her cereal out of the kitchen. Ethan looked at Victoria. "The arrangement we made," he said, "in October." She was watching him carefully. "Yes. I want to change it." "To what?" "To the actual thing," he said. "Not an arrangement, not an agreement. The actual thing, whatever that is, whatever it takes. I'm not good at saying this kind of thing. I want you to know that up front, so you don't think the fact that I'm saying it badly means I don't mean it. I mean it. I meant it somewhere around the farmer's market, and I've been figuring out how to say it since." She was quiet. "You came here because your father sent you to someone who'd still be standing," he said. "And I've been standing. That's all I've ever done, honestly, is stay standing. But the reason I want to keep standing—" He stopped. "The reason changed. It's not the farm anymore. It's not even Lily, though Lily she's everything. She's the center of everything. The reason changed, and I think you know what I'm saying." Victoria set down her coffee cup. She looked at it, then at him. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything that isn't true," he said. "That's not what I'm asking for. I'm just telling you what's true on my end." "I know it's what you're not asking for," she said. "That's part of the problem, actually. You never ask for things. You just offer them." "Is that a problem?" "It makes it very hard to match," she said. "I spent years in a world where everyone was asking for something, and the thing they were asking for was never the thing they said it was. And you have been—" She stopped. "From the night I knocked on this door, you have been exactly what you said you were. No more, no less. You said you'd be there, and you were there. You said you'd come to the dinner, and you came to the dinner. You said the arrangement, and then you quietly just became something else, without making a production of it, without... You did the same thing, he said. I know, she said. That's what I'm saying. I think we both stopped pretending this was an arrangement sometime in November, and neither of us said anything about it. I'm saying something now, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She had a way of looking at him that had changed over 3 months. In the beginning, it had been assessment, careful and guarded, the look of someone who had been burned enough times to inspect things carefully. Now it was something else, something open in it that hadn't been open before. I'm not good at this either, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not easy to be with. I work too much and I go internal when I'm scared instead of saying I'm scared, and I have approximately 0 experience with the kind of thing you're describing. I know all of that, he said. And the farm, she said. I don't want to, whatever this is, I don't want it to mean I'm taking over your life. This is your life. This is Lily's life. I'm aware that I've been landing here like a... Victoria, he said. What? You fixed the barn latch in week 1. She blinked. You asked me where it went and I showed you and you remembered. You've been closing it right every night since October. He looked at her. This is not someone landing in someone else's life. This is someone who learned the latch. She was quiet. Something moved across her face that wasn't composed or controlled, just real and unguarded, and specifically hers. The expression she had when she wasn't managing what she showed. Okay, she said. Her voice was slightly different. Okay. Yes. The actual thing. Yes. Yes, he said. Yes. In the living room, Lily's voice floated in. Are you done talking about feelings? Can I come back? I finished my cereal. Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria pressed her lips together against something. Yes, she called. You can come back. Lily came back with Gregory and her empty bowl, and the particular expression of someone who had a theory about what had just happened and was choosing not to share it on this occasion, but was filing it carefully for future reference. She put her bowl in the sink, both adults noted this, and climbed up on her chair. Are we getting a dog? She said. No, Ethan said. Not yet, Victoria said at the same time. They looked at each other. Not yet, Ethan repeated. Lily accepted this with the focused satisfaction of someone who had just won a preliminary round. The weeks after that had a different quality to them. Not easier exactly. The Attorney General's formal investigation into Mercer generated paperwork and calls, and 2 trips to the city for Victoria to give statements. And the farm had its normal winter demands, and the shed still needed to be rebuilt properly. And Lily had a complicated month at school involving a disagreement with a classmate named Parker that required more diplomatic energy than some of the international conflicts Ethan had read about, but different. Lighter in a way that wasn't about the absence of difficulty, but about having someone to carry the difficulty with. That was the thing he hadn't understood before. He'd thought of help as dependency, as a kind of weakness in the structure of things. His father had been that way. You managed your own problems on your own ground, and you didn't put them on other people. There was a version of that ethic that was integrity, and a version of it that was just fear wearing integrity's clothes, and Ethan had been carrying the second version for years without knowing how to tell them apart. Victoria had a phrase for it that she said once, offhandedly, not as a lesson, but just as a thing she'd noticed. People who've been through hard things alone for long enough start to think that's just the shape of things. That alone is normal, and company is temporary. He'd thought about that for several days. In January, Damian Mercer was formally charged by the state attorney general with fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations. The story ran on the front page of the state's largest newspaper and the financial section of 3 national papers. His lawyers released another statement. The statements were getting shorter. Marcus Webb, through his attorney, agreed to serve as a formal witness for the prosecution. In exchange, he received the immunity agreement Victoria had promised him, negotiated through the federal prosecutor contact her father had cultivated over 2 decades. Marcus called Victoria the day the agreement was signed, and she took the call standing in the kitchen, and when it ended, she stood there for a moment and then said quietly, "He said my father would have been proud." Ethan didn't say anything. He just stayed where he was. She looked at him. "He would have been proud of you too," she said. "I know he would have." "I didn't know him," Ethan said. You knew him the way that matters, she said. The way you treat people. The way you showed up. He saw that in you 30 years ago. A pause. He was a very difficult man to impress. I wasn't trying to impress him, Ethan said. I know, she said. That's exactly why he was. The shed was rebuilt in February, with Ray's help and 2 other neighbors who showed up on a Saturday morning with tools and coffee and the kind of wordless practical solidarity that rural communities offer when they decide to offer it. It was better than the original, better framed, better roofed, built to last another 50 years. Victoria brought out lunch at noon, and nobody made a big thing about who she was or what had been in the papers, because Ray had apparently had a word with people beforehand, which was a form of grace that Ethan recognized and was grateful for. She's good people, Ray told him when the others had gone and they were cleaning up the lumber scraps. I know, Ethan said. I wasn't sure in November, Ray said, which was honesty unasked for and characteristic. What changed your mind? She shoveled my driveway when the February storm came and I was down with my back, Ray said. Didn't tell me until a week later. I had to find out from my wife. He picked up a scrap of 2x4. People who do things without needing credit for them. Rare. I know, Ethan said again. It was March, when this farm started to look like itself again, the way it always did when the ground thawed and the light changed and the year turned back toward the possible. Ethan had ordered seed for the spring planting, more than last year, because Victoria had spent the winter developing a plan, a real business plan, for expanding the organic operation into a formal CSA program with direct restaurant contracts. She'd done it on her own time, on evenings and weekends when the company work was done, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and a yellow pad, and the concentrated focus that she brought to things she actually cared about. She'd shown it to him in February, printed out in a folder, which he suspected was her way of treating it like a real proposal because she was uncertain how he'd receive it. He'd read it at the kitchen table. It was thorough. It was also genuinely good. She understood the agricultural economics in a way that surprised him until he remembered who her father was and how she'd grown up. And she'd built in the constraints of what the land could actually sustain rather than projecting from optimism, which was the mistake most outside developed farm plans made. What do you think? She'd said when he looked up. I think you've been planning this since November, he said. October, actually. She was watching him. The part where I thought about what I wanted to do here, what this could be. I started thinking about it when I was helping you at the market. He'd looked at the plan again. The restaurant contracts. Do you have relationships there? 3 confirmed, 2 likely. The chef at Halverson's has been sourcing organic from out of state, and he told me in January that he'd rather source locally if the quality and volume were there. Our quality is there. Volume is the question. We'd need another 8 acres in production, he said. Maybe 12. I know, the South Field, if the irrigation issue gets fixed. I've been fixing the irrigation issue. I know that too. She looked at him steadily. I'm not trying to take over. I know you're not, he said. I'm asking how quickly you want to move. As quickly as makes sense, she said. You're the one who knows the land. He looked at the plan. He looked at her. Spring planting, he said. We start the South Field this spring. The first planting went into the South Field in late March, on a cold, clear morning that smelled like everything that was coming. Ethan drove the seed line, and Victoria walked behind checking the depth, and Lily, who had the day off school for some kind of teacher training, ran along the fence line narrating what she was observing in a voice loud enough to be heard over the tractor. She had recently decided she was interested in farming, and had asked very specific questions about soil and seeds that Ethan had answered as accurately as he could, and Victoria had supplemented with things she'd apparently looked up because she took Lily's questions seriously. He watched them. His daughter and this woman walking the edge of the field in the March cold, Lily talking, and Victoria listening with her real attention, the kind you couldn't fake with a child because children always knew. And he thought about October. The black car at the end of the driveway. The bruise on her jaw, the 4 minutes in a courthouse. He thought about what you couldn't have predicted from that moment. He thought about how badly he'd wanted, in those first weeks, for this to be a contained and manageable thing, a practical arrangement with clear edges that he could navigate without getting too far inside of it. He thought about how comprehensively that plan had failed, and how entirely glad he was that it had. April came in warm. The South Field was in. The CSA program launched with 11 subscribers in the first week, which Victoria called conservative and Ethan called remarkable. And they had the first actual argument of their relationship about what to call it, which lasted 20 minutes and ended when Lily said, "Can't it be both?" which was so accurate that they both stopped talking. It was a Tuesday evening in April when Victoria came in from the garden. She'd taken over the vegetable garden completely by this point, which Ethan had surrendered without much fight because she was genuinely better at it than he was, a fact he'd accepted with the equanimity of someone who had learned to separate ego from competence. And she stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before saying anything. He was at the stove. He looked at her. She looked different. Not bad different, just stopped. Standing there with a stillness that wasn't her normal stillness. "Are you okay?" he said. "I think so," she said. "You think so?" "I need to—" She stopped. Started again. "I took a test this morning." The kitchen was very quiet. "I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure. I wanted to be sure before I—" She stopped again. "Ethan." He had turned from the stove. She looked at him across the kitchen, and she looked like a person standing at the edge of something enormous, without knowing yet whether it would hold. "We're having a baby," she said. He didn't speak for a moment, not because he didn't know what to say, but because what he felt was so large and so fast that it needed a second to resolve into words. He looked at her face, at the uncertainty in it, at the thing underneath the uncertainty that was not uncertainty at all. He crossed the kitchen. He put his arms around her and she let him, leaning in with the specific weight of someone who has been holding themselves very straight for a very long time and is finally, genuinely allowing themselves not to. He felt her exhale against his shoulder. "Okay," he said into her hair. "Okay?" "Yeah, okay." He held on. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I'm a lot of things right now." "That's fine," he said. "Take your time." "You're not—" "Victoria, we're having a baby." She pulled back enough to look at him. He looked back at her in the kitchen in April, with the smell of dinner on the stove and the evening light coming through the window above the sink, the light that came through that window in April, and hit the wall at an angle that always made the kitchen look warmer than it was. "I'm scared," she said. "Me too," he said. "You don't look scared." "I'm very good at not looking scared," he said. "Ask anyone." She laughed. The real kind. The caught-off-guard kind. Lily came in from the living room at this point because she had impeccable timing and no concept of what she was walking into. She looked at them, Ethan's arms around Victoria, both of them in the kitchen looking at each other, and conducted her assessment. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing," Ethan said. "Something happened." "Good thing," Victoria said. "What good thing?" They looked at each other. Victoria raised her eyebrows slightly, which was the question. "Do we tell her now?" Ethan considered it for approximately 2 seconds. "You're going to be a big sister," he said. The expression that moved across Lily's face in the following 3 seconds was the full range of human response to unexpected large news. Shock, then confusion, then processing, then something breaking open into pure undiluted delight. "A baby," she said, at a volume that was probably audible from Ray's farm. "Yes," Victoria said. "A real baby?" "As opposed to what?" Ethan said. "Can I name it?" "Absolutely not," Ethan said. "What about a middle name? We'll discuss it." "What about if it's a girl?" "I have ideas." "Lily, I've been thinking about names for a while," she said, with a dignity that suggested this was information she had been holding in reserve and had finally found an occasion to deploy. "I have a list." "You have a list," Victoria said. "In my head," Lily clarified. "It's a mental list." "Of course it is," Victoria said. The evening finished. Dinner was eaten. Lily contributed her mental list to the conversation, whether invited or not, and the list contained a name she'd apparently gotten from a book, a name that was her teacher's name, which she offered diplomatically as a strong option, and a name she'd invented herself that she declined to spell out because she said the spelling was still being finalized. Ethan managed the kitchen and the child and the evening routine with the practiced efficiency of 4 years of solo parenting, but it was different now. The way it had been different for months. The house was full in a way it hadn't been, and Lily moved through the fullness of it with the ease of someone who had never needed to be told twice that good things were worth accepting. He put her to bed at 8:30. She made him stay for an extra story, which he did, and then she lay in the dark and said, "Daddy." "Yeah." "Is Miss Vicky going to stay?" He looked at the ceiling above her bed, which had a plastic glow-in-the-dark moon sticker on it that she'd put there herself and that he'd never taken down. "She's staying," he said. "Forever?" "That's the plan." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Gregory is glad," she said. "Gregory," Ethan said, "has very good judgment." She was asleep in 10 minutes. He went back downstairs. Victoria was at the kitchen table with her laptop closed, which was unusual enough that he noticed, and she was just sitting there. He made tea. He put a mug in front of her and sat across from her, and they were in the kitchen the way they were in the kitchen, the way they'd been in the kitchen since October, which was the most ordinary and most important place either of them had been in a long time. "She okay?" Victoria asked. "She's drafting baby names in her head as we speak," he said. "I know. She told me 2 more while you were upstairs." "Which ones?" "Rosalind and Maximilian." "Maximilian," he said. She said it had energy. "She's not wrong," he said. They sat. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the April fields were dark and planted, the south field and the east field, and the original plots that his grandfather had broken from raw land and his father had nearly lost, and Ethan had held on to through the kind of stubbornness that he no longer apologized for. The farm was not the same farm it had been in October. Not in the way that things change when they're fixed or improved. In the way things change when they grow into what they were supposed to be. He thought about what his father used to say about land, that the soil didn't care about your plans. It just held what was planted in it, and if you paid attention and did the work, it gave back what was possible. Not more, but not less either. He'd been paying attention. He'd done the work. He'd done it alone for 4 years, and then someone had knocked on his door in October and he'd opened it, which was the bravest and most accidental thing he'd ever done. And the farm had held what was planted in it the way his father said it would. "Hey," Victoria said. He looked at her. "Whatever you're thinking," she said, "you look like you've made peace with it." "Getting there," he said. "Good." She picked up her tea. "Me too." They sat in the kitchen in the quiet April evening, and the house was full around them, not with noise or drama or the particular pressure of things unresolved, but with the ordinary weight of a life that had more in it than it used to. A child asleep upstairs with a mental list of baby names, a field planted that hadn't been planted before, a barn with a new wall and a rebuilt shed and a latch that closed correctly. The particular warmth of a room where 2 people are comfortable enough with each other to sit without speaking and not feel the silence as a lack. Some people spend their whole lives building toward a moment like this and never find it. Some people find it and don't recognize it until it's past. Ethan Cole recognized it while it was happening, which was maybe the thing about him that had been true all along, and that he'd never quite known was a quality. The ability to be present in his own life, to see it clearly, without the filter of what he'd hoped it would be or what he feared it wasn't. He was not a perfect man. He was stubborn, and he went quiet when he should speak, and he cared about his land in a way that was sometimes easier than caring about people, and he had walls that had taken months to open and would probably take years to finish opening. The scar on his face would always be there. The grief was not gone, just transformed into something that could coexist with happiness, which was the most honest thing he knew about grief. And Victoria was not perfect either. She was controlling in ways she was still learning to manage, and she worked too much and too late. And she had a habit of doing things for people without asking if they wanted them done, which came from a good place and still sometimes landed wrong. She was learning the farm the way you learn a language in the country where it's spoken, imperfectly and continually, and with genuine investment. They were imperfect people in an imperfect house on an imperfect piece of land, building something that did not have a name more precise than this. And this was enough. It was more than enough. It was the specific, unremarkable, irreplaceable thing that people meant when they talked about a life. Outside, the April night was clear. The fields were dark and waiting. In the east, where the sun would come up in a few hours, the sky was just beginning to consider the idea of light. The farm was still standing. It always would be.